the Board of Selectmen's meeting to order for Monday, February 4th, 2019, and as required by open meeting law, you're hereby informed that the town will be video and audio taping as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience who plans to video or audio tape this meeting must notify the chairman prior to the start of the meeting. Hearing nobody, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. We started this session earlier this evening, an executive session, and we tabled our items. The only action we took was to address our executive session minutes, which we'll address in the consent agenda. Excuse me. Anybody for weekly briefing? Anybody for public comments and announcements? Yes.
Hi, my name's Amy Harris, and I live at 4 Chapel Hill Lane. I don't even know if this is the right time to do it.
Oh, what is this?
It's on the agenda, and I'm asking the Harwich Board of Selectmen to change their name to the Select Board.
Oh, you're on the agenda, so you can hold.
That comes later.
Yeah, you'll.
I can't make my comment and cut out.
No, you're on the agenda.
All right. Thanks.
Good.
Anyone else for public comment or announcements? Nobody? Okay. Ed?
Yeah. Madam Chair, I'd like to present the consent agenda and move approval of the items thereon, including approval of the executive session minutes from the following days: June 11th, 2018, July 9th, 2018, July 23rd, 2018, August 6th, 2018, August 20th, 2018, November 19th, 2018, November 26th, 2018, and December 3rd, 2018. Approve accepting a gift of $924 from the Friends of the Council on Aging for the purchase of 2 safety net tracking systems for the Council on Aging. Approval of a free waiver of $60 for the Monomoy Regional School District School Superintendent for use of a room at the Community Center on February 5th, 2019. To accept the resignation of Mary Maslowski as the Housing Committee's representative to the Community Preservation Committee, and vote to refer the following proposed zoning bylaws to the Planning Board for public hearing. 1, single-family dwelling with accessory apartment. 2, freestanding portable signs. 3, retaining walls for septic systems. And 4, special provisions for lifting existing structure to new and appropriate elevations.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
None.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous. Public hearings and presentations. Cape Cod Regional Technical High School and Monomoy Regional School District to meet with Selectmen and Finance Committee to discuss first draft budget and 5-year plan. To also discuss the growth rate for non-teaching personnel, central office, and percentage of increase for Monomoy Regional. Do you want to go first, Cape Cod Tech? Or?
Just call the Finance Committee for it.
Oh, sorry, Dave. Thank you. Do you want to come join us, or do you?
Your mic isn't shadow. Is there somebody from Cape Cod Tech?
Yeah, Bob's
Yeah, he's right there.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, it was up first, so.
Yeah, the tech, are you gonna,
But the tech was up first.
tech is up first, so,
Technically,
Sorry.
sorry.
it's just listed first, so.
Nice
After that game last night, thank you very much.
Nice tie.
Thank you. Likewise.
Sale.
So, I have some handouts that I can give you afterwards, or if you want to refer to them, I'll just leave them over here.
Give them out.
That's good. just given are the full line item budget for FY '20, the draft assessments for all 12 towns, but with Harwich on there, and then the assessment for the capital project, which will be due in November of 2019, and that's on this sheet. This has been shared with Chris Clark already. So prepared by Aaron Orcutt, my business manager. So I will fly. If I heard the word fly, I will do that. I first want to say this has been a process. We're not at the beginnings. We're not at the beginning. We're at the end. Our public hearing for our budget will be February 28th at 6:30 at our school in our conference room. But this committee, subcommittee of our 23-member school committee, has been working on this since October, and really Aaron Orcutt, our business manager, has been working since April, last April, to get to the budget I'm presenting this evening. I do want to thank Lee Culver and Bob Furtado, who are in the audience. Want to raise your hands, guys, on our school committee. And Lee also serves, as you see, on our school building committee, and Bob is the vice chair of our school committee. Very influential members of our, representing Harwich. And then Chris Clark, who I'm sorry to hear he's not here tonight, but good to see Bob Lawton, but has been an invaluable member of our school building committee. He's been very, very helpful throughout the whole process. And Lee, Paul Funk, and Bruce Young from the fire department, who goes to every weekly meeting with the OPM, the architect, has been invaluable as well. So we lost 21 students from 19 to 20, and you see in Harwich we lost 10. So I think that's bad news. Financially, that's going to be good news in this fiscal year for the town of Harwich as we go through my presentation. But we continue to redouble our efforts to get the word out about Cape Cod Regional Tech. One thing I will say is there's a potential boomerang in enrollment coming up. Obviously, we're hopeful the new school is going to have an impact on enrollment, but we have a very small senior class. So when that senior class graduates, there's almost a, if we have a good admission season, which it's going pretty well, we do see a bump. So just to look at 21 real quickly, it could boomerang. Now, for the town of Harwich, I don't know if that's going to be true or not until the season's over. But I just want to mention that I think I see our enrollment trending in a good direction starting next year. And that's just a graphical representation. Obviously, Barnstable is now 31% of our entire enrollment, as the enrollment from the town of Yarmouth has decreased significantly over the last couple of years. Yarmouth is our second largest town at 19%. And as you see, the papers going around, the assessment for the building project is based on enrollment, the previous year's enrollment, and you'll see that, and these percentages reflected in that spreadsheet. A little history for the town of Harwich. In 16, we had 73 students. We've been hovering in the mid-70s most of the time, but now down to 67 after the loss of 10 students this past year. And you see the lower watermark too as a percentage overall of our enrollment, as Harwich is down to 11.4%. So that's something that impacts assessments as well. So the group that I said, the Finance Subcommittee, is presenting, we've come up with a 0.96% increased budget. And if you look at the last 6 years, I think we've been pretty conservative in our budgeting. Some things have gone our way. In 16, I will bring to your attention, that's when we asked for $250,000 for the feasibility study for the building project. But other than that, after 15, we've never asked for anything over 3, and since 17, we haven't asked for anything over 2. So that's in recognition of a few things. Our per pupil spending is something we're trying to work on. And when you're a smaller school, that's more difficult to do, but we are working on our per pupil spending, because we are one of the more expensive vocational technical high school when you say by per pupil spending, but also a recognition of the loss in enrollment. And also a recognition, we know that the expense of the building is a major additional cost. Even though a debt exclusion went through, we do know that the taxpayers are footing 2 assessments over this time period, and once again I want to thank the voters from October of 2017 for overwhelmingly supporting our building project. I'm going to skip this because you are a regional school, you're part of a regional school, so these items are in our budget just like they are for Monomoy, because that's Lyden, Barnstable, and Mashpee. As always, all the money is coming from, almost all the money is coming from assessments, but you'll see that state aid is up a tiny bit, and local revenue, we are devoting $200,000 from our excess and deficiency. We are very close to our max. We're at about 4.7%, not certified yet, but around that. So we are devoting $200,000 from E&D to this budget. That's in that local revenue category. This is just a visual representation of the same, that modest budget increases in the light blue, and then state aid really is stagnant. It doesn't really increase much at all for the Cape and the Islands. We don't really win in the Chapter 70 funding formula, even when they redesign it. There is something, just real quickly on that, the governor's budget's out, and obviously there's a legislative process to be had, but the students in our building, we have 55% high needs. 55% of our students are ELL, special needs, or economically disadvantaged, or a combination of those. And in the governor's budget and in the proposal to address the foundation budget, economically disadvantaged students, there's a kicker in there. They're raising the funding, and if that goes through, that could be advantageous for us in the long run. Believe it or not, they break up the state into the deciles, of the most poor being 10. Cape Cod Tech is a level 9. So just to put that in perspective, around the state, your Hollyoaks, your Springfields, we are one decile above them with the economically disadvantaged nature of our student body. So that could help us going forward. Obviously also a problem. This is just a history of state aid. As I said, relatively stagnant over the many years, and assessments drive the bus. The towns are footing the majority of the bill for the school system, and we thank the townspeople for that. I'm going to skip this slide. It's a little hard to read, but this is a graphic representation of the highest of all the percentages of some major categories, with teacher salaries, as always, 34% of the budget. Obviously, they're the most, other than students, they're the most important people. They're right in front of the students. They're with the direct contact. This is a chart that just represents that pie chart you just saw before. One thing I'll note is that we've got, I think we've got great news from the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group. So actually a 0% increase. That's helping us get to this 0.96% budget as well. We did have an increase a little bit in insurance benefits, which I'll get to. Insurance costs, I'm sorry. So what's making up the 0.96 increase? It's primarily insurances and a little bit of an increase in materials and services, and it's mostly on the services side, not materials. Those budgets are relatively stagnant, and benefits are down. We've seen a migration to higher deductible plans for some of our employees with health savings accounts, which has been helpful. And we've also seen some of our active employees choosing other health insurance. So our active roles are down a little bit. So with a 0% increase in that migration, it's looking a little better. On the retirees benefits side, it's a totally different story. But in the retirees are within that benefits number you see there. We've got an increase in, we have more retirees on our health rolls now than we have active employees. So what's driving the budget? Obviously, salaries and benefits account for more than 76% of our budget, and that's appropriate. So the retirees' health insurance issue, I'm sure it's high on the mind of the Finance Committee and this board about the issue of other post-employment benefits, primarily the cost of health insurance for employees in retirement. We are a member of the Plymouth OPEB Trust, Plymouth County OPEB Trust. This number of we have $660,000 as of 2017. I'm proud to say that is up towards almost $900,000, and with this budget, I see it over $1 million after the 20 fiscal year. sitting in that trust for the express purpose of addressing long-term the OPEB issue. Our Finance Committee, the group I showed you at the beginning of this presentation, is taking OPEB extremely seriously. One thing we learned when going out to borrow for this building, that was one of the first questions they asked, do you have a strategy for dealing with OPEB? And they were pleased to see that we've been making these strides so far. As you see, our liability is about $20 million, and we have contracted with Siegel, who some of you know, the audit firm that does that unfunded liability calculation, and they've given us 4 different scenarios that our Finance Committee is going to look at on going forward to address on a, say for a 30-year time period, a 40-year time period, or a 20-year time period, what number do we have to have in our budget every single year to, ultimately retire this issue. And I think we're going to be tackling that at the February meeting and making some decisions for FY21 and beyond. Real quickly, our MCAS performance, relatively steady. We take the technology and engineering test for our students. MCAS science, around 70% of the students on first try are advanced or proficient, and some need a little bit more time, represented by the yellow section there. About 8% this past year had to take some intense support to get over the hump for MCAS science. And ELA is a much nicer picture. We've always been around 90% or better in advanced or proficient, and very few students fail that exam. We are extremely worried about transitioning at the high school level to the new next generation MCAS, and it's going to be kind of a reset here of performance when that test is implemented in March and we get the results later in the year. In math, still working on math. About 70% of the students get advanced or proficient, with another 23 needs improvement, keeping in mind that needs improvement still meets the competency determination for graduation. But our work with math continues. It's always been a struggle with getting kids into the advanced and proficient category. We're always working to get there. Graduation rate, this for all students was right around 90% in 2017, and we do have some issues, especially with our students with disabilities, with regard to graduation rate, and that's something we've taken several steps to address over the last couple of years. A couple of you had the opportunity to come to our groundbreaking on the 11th. Thank you for coming. And the building project is underway. The slated date of completion now is 2020, September or June of 2020, is a potential substantial completion, with getting in there for the September 2021 school year, or September of 2020. And this is just a little breakdown on, this shows a 2021 entry. That is the official number right now, but we are working with Brait Builders, who got the contract, and our architects and our OPM. We see that being revised to the dates I just gave you, 2020. Okay, but in the bid documents, this is what was in there, and it's not official yet but that 2020 is the date. But as soon as they got the job, they said, we're getting you in there in the summer of 2020. So we're excited about that. On the bottom, capetech.us/future. Anybody can go to that website down here, right here. I don't know if I got that. Anyways, capetech.us/future. Go there. You can see the new design. You get some 3D modeling. If you hover over it, and you see the different spaces in our Transportation Academy, our Life Sciences Academy, our STEAM Academy, and our Construction Academy. So, with that, I would open it up for questions.
Thank you, great presentation. Any questions from the board? Do you want to start with the Finance Committee? Dana?
I have none at this time, no.
Anybody? Finance? Finance? sounds like we are good.
Crickets,
Good,
okay,
yeah.
all right. Thank you very much.
Good kind.
Yes, the
Good,
good kind.
I have a couple of questions, Bob.
Oh,
Finance ends here, and
okay,
guys, politicians over there.
okay.
I usually,
You were a former one.
the 10% for plant operations, what's entailed in plant operations? Does that
That's-
change because of the new
That's everything
building?
from, you know, your utilities, I don't think utilities is a breakout, I don't have it in front of me, but,
Is that different with the new building, more or less? Or-
you know, that's developing the '21 budget's gonna be interesting, because there's a lot of factors that I'm sure Scott knows about the maintenance and operations of a new plant, physical plant. So I hear that the electricity may go down, but the electricity may go up, but the heating costs may go down. Like just today, Tony Molis, my lead facilities guy, said, because they had an HVAC meeting, and you have to change the filters every eight times a year. That's going to be a substantial increase in the amount of filters we have to buy. So things like that, service contracts on some of this complex equipment that's going in, you know, more computerized than the stuff we have now. Those costs will go up. I think fuel costs could offset some of that. I don't expect a huge savings moving into the new building.
You mentioned disabilities. Is the new building more user-friendly for those?
Most
Will that
definitely.
help?
Most definitely, completely ADA compliant, and then the spaces, for example, in all the classrooms, the sound is uniform. They have a system that's built into the room that allows for the sound for students with disabilities, for example, who may have some distractions, or if they're in the back of the room they can't hear. That's one little thing that is in these new classrooms. These new classrooms are bright. They have what we lack in our current school in many areas is natural light. You know, that's going to be a huge improvement. And then just the bare square footage are all now meeting the minimum requirements for a classroom, both technical and academic. So it's going to be a vastly different facility. And I know those who walk into our school, they walk into that grand hallway, which I'd love to transport that hallway to the new school. But if you get to the bottom floor, it's a basement. There's very little light, a lot of humidity issues in the summers. And then the third floor was designed with that open concept where they had no, so over the years we divided it up into classrooms that are far below the recommended square footage. So from a learning space, it is going to be a vast improvement.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Yep.
I'm all set.
Thank you, Bob.
Yep.
Ed?
Well, just a couple comments on, you mentioned Bruce Young, who
Yes.
was a great asset to the Monomoy Building Committee, so I know how he's treating you well.
He is treating us well.
And the other issue, I know that you're in transferring to the new facility, you're not going to have space for the dental clinic.
That's correct.
But there are a group of us working locally to locate that, so it'll still be relatively close for your dental program to use for internships that
Yeah, that's,
remain as a service for this area.
yeah, at our last legislative breakfast a year ago, we had the legislators in to talk about the future of the dental center. And then I just had a meeting with the leadership of Harbor Health, and they're exploring opportunities. I think there may be some opportunities in the town of Harwich, so that would be fantastic, because that is a loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This isn't directly related to the budget numbers, but since you put it in your budget presentation
Sure.
about the building,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that you're holding on to the thought of an appropriate place to name after Jimmy Marsline.
We're going to have a space in the new building that remembers the old building. I have to work with my school committee on that, because there's a tremendous amount of people who've had input and had a profound impact on Cape Cod Regional Technical High School, Mr. Marceline being one of them. And there's always been a reticence to name anything. So I have to overcome that. And I only met Mr. Marceline twice. And my predecessor, Bill Fisher, always tried to give him an award. And he would never take it. He would never come over to get it. He was there when there was a fundraiser for a kid who was sick, and he would come in one door and go out another door, and you wouldn't even know he was there. But he's not big into the recognition of that. That's just my observation.
I just say to you, arguably, you wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for
No
him.
doubt.
There would not have been a tech school in the first place.
I agree. I agree.
I just had one follow-up. You mentioned about the governor's new economic, the disadvantaged students in
Yes.
terms of a formula. When will you have that info, do you know?
Well, right now, the governor's budget came out, we got $20 more a student.
Okay.
So, but there was things going on inside of it where, if you've ever heard of hold harmless, we're no longer held harmless. So our floor has gone up. Whether that has significant impacts going forward remains to be seen. But from a year to year, we got $20 a student. Okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for all the hard work. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay.
Monomoy? Good evening.
We'll try to be short. I think I'm going to pare back some slides to get that way. So, we meet with this board tonight. We have a meeting with the Chatham Board of Selectmen and their Finance Committee a week from now, and tomorrow night we are going to hold a evening forum at the community center. Some people are asking, well, why not have it in the schools? And I was a little worried that we have meetings at the schools all the time, and there's a set in the community that don't come into the schools. So we were going to try to find some place that hopefully we can have them join us at a place that is more comfortable to them if they're not coming into the schools. Ultimately, on the February 12th, we'll have our annual budget hearing, and so that again is another opportunity for people to come and see the Monomoy budget. I shared at our school committee meeting a 30,000-foot view of the Monomoy budget. This has one significant driver behind it. We have some out-of-district costs that show up within this budget that happen within school districts. It's been a number of years since Harwich and Chatham last had the out-of-district line increase appreciably in any given year, but this is one of them. Even with that out-of-district increase, this is a 3% budget. If we don't include that out-of-district increase, it's a 1.96% budget. It is a reduced staff budget. I have been deliberately working with our school committee and working with Chris Clark just to sort of understand where the town is and what the town's priorities are. We feel that given that we've seen a reduction in some of our enrollments, and I'll share that as I get through this, that we can be in a place to pare back some of our staffing, but still be in a position to go and maintain programs and opportunities for our students. We also have in this budget the health insurance with Cape Cod Municipal Health Group when it came in at a 0% for the active employees. And unlike on the town side, when it comes to health insurance for the school side, because we're a relatively new regional school district, our retirees from days gone by are on the town side of the ledger. We have very few retirees, so when the active was a 0%, that greatly helped this budget. We also feel that the bus transportation, where it's coming in as we look towards working with the Cape Cod Collaborative, that's going to help this budget come in at a reasonable place. And then something that showed up in the newspapers and conversation I had with Chris is when the governor's numbers came out, there was a swing in the minimum required contribution towards Harwich, rather appreciably towards Harwich. And I'll talk about some of the factors that are behind that in some of these graphs that we'll get into. So one of the things behind a school district's budget is the state aid. And I provide in the presentation I made before our school committee a graph. The orange line here shows what the state aid increase was in the state. And you'll notice that the total state aid for the state went up appreciably this year, hence the sort of change in trajectory of that orange line. Unfortunately, when it comes to our school district, and in part this is because of some of the the wealth factors in our communities, our school district didn't see that big bump on state aid. In terms of minimum required contribution, I have mentioned that minimum required contribution has swung up towards Harwich in recent years, and Chatham is seeing a slight decline. When we look at minimum required contribution, one of the factors in there is the school district's foundation enrollment. Foundation enrollment would be all of the students that attend public schools that live in Harwich or Chatham, except for those that are attending Cape Tech. So if they are attending Sturgis, they actually show up in our budget because we're paying tuition for those students, or if they attend Nauset or DY through school choice, they show up in our budget because we're having to pay tuition for them. So all of those students end up in the foundation enrollment. When we calculate an assessment, the assessment is based on a 3-year rolling average. So if you look at the 3-year rolling average of foundation enrollment, it's staying relatively smooth. The next couple slides here sort of show you what happens when you calculate, or when the state's calculating the minimum required contribution, because in the green bars here are what the foundation enrollment is in any given year. So the state doesn't do this 3-year smoothing of foundation enrollment when calculating the minimum required contribution. It's doing an instantaneous, what's the enrollment of students October 1 of any particular year. And October 1 of this year, we saw a slight decline in the number of students from Chatham, and we saw a relatively large increase in the number of students from Harwich. So we see minimum required contribution heading down for Chatham, largely driven by an foundation enrollment decline, but the foundation enrollment for Harwich has been heading up the last couple of years, and that's causing a rise in the minimum required contribution. And again, it's almost a bit of a mixed blessing. There are so many communities out here on the Cape that are talking about what can we do to go and keep young families, to get more school-age children. Well, Harwich is doing something right, because we're seeing it's one of the communities that's seeing an increase here. So it is that double-edged sword. More kids also means for the regional school district more cost. In terms of the budget development guidelines that the school district has used, this year we had a strategic planning process that we went through. So we have a new strategic plan that's in place. This strategic plan was in the backs of everyone's minds as we were developing the budget. We have tried, ever since I've been here, to keep our elementary class sizes averaging at 18 plus or minus 1, and our middle school and high school class sizes averaging at 19 plus or minus 2. And we're also very cognizant that we want to make sure that the budget fits within the fiscal wherewithal of our two communities. So as I said, this is a level staff, or it's a reduced staff budget with level services. So we acknowledge that since FY16, we've seen a 58 student decline in enrollment, and we're trying to mirror that decline in enrollment with a slight reduction in staffing. And that's not the superintendent being alarmist that we're laying off teachers. This is just the reality that we're seeing a decline in enrollment And this isn't anything new. The last couple of years, I've been coming here, particularly when we look at Chatham Elementary. Chatham Elementary has been shrinking faster than Harwich Elementary, and we have been reducing a section at Chatham Elementary for this will be the third year that we've reduced one grade level classroom at Chatham Elementary School. This budget has a placeholder in there for the closure or ratification for our teacher's contract. That ratification vote we expect on the 12th, so that's upcoming. But that hopefully is behind us, and hopefully on the 12th we'll be able to go and celebrate what was reached in that agreement. We have the governor's numbers are behind this budget, as is the minimum required contributions that were released on the 23rd of the past month. We also, like Cape Tech, have $100,000 that is going towards our OPEB, Outstanding Post-Employment Benefits. The 3-year rolling average on the operations has shifted. The foundation enrollment has shifted slightly towards Harwich. It's shifted by 0.2% towards Harwich. So the split is for the operations in debt, 26.55% Chatham, 73.45% Harwich. In terms of enrollment, enrollment here being the students that are sitting in the seats at Monomoy, not foundation enrollment. In terms of enrollment, we are a district that's 65% Harwich, 22% Chatham, and 13% school choice. We have seen our enrollment sort of peak up around FY16. It tailed down a little bit, and 18 rebounded slightly as we went into this school year, and we anticipate it's going to hang roughly even going into next school year. In terms of staffing comparisons, this is a budget that reduces staff by 8.5 FTEs. I think Julie had asked for, are there changes that have happened when it comes to district level staffing? For us, the biggest changes that happened in district level staffing was the shift from FY16 to FY17. We had a large conversation with the school committee at FY16 where we had one person that was doing about 2.5 jobs. We had our technology director for the district was responsible for all of the instructional technology that was happening in all of our schools. They were responsible for all of the data reporting that schools have to do with the state, which is in and of itself almost a full-time job as these unfunded mandates keep coming down in terms of data that has to get reported out there. This person was responsible for trying to keep a rather clunky website that the district started with in line. We shifted between FY16 to FY17. We discussed with the school committee splitting that job into really 2 major jobs, one of them being our Director of Instructional Technology, which is Jim Birchfield, now holds that role, and the other was to create a data specialist role that Holly Thing has been managing, that takes any sort of data that we're reporting back to the state and is overseeing that data. But we also do a lot of testing from starting in kindergarten all the way up through grade 10. We do something called measures of academic progress, MAP testing, where we're testing students 3 times a year. It's a computer adaptive test that helps teachers identify students' strengths and students' needs in the moment. MCAS testing that the state does, you get those results after the student has moved on to the next grade level or the next teacher. This map testing allows us to go and put things in place for students in the moment, and Holly has a huge role in helping that testing happen and be available for teachers. The other thing that happened in this sort of breakup of what our director of technology used to do is a website. We hired a consultant, Joy Jordan, who we hired to ultimately develop the current website that the district uses. That's a night and day difference from what the district had to begin with. And then this past year, we coupled to the consulting work that Joy was doing an extra $20,000 to go and hire her on as a full-time community engagement coordinator that sort of spelled out and what that role is doing within the overall slide deck that you have. In terms of class sizes, our class sizes at the elementary level are in the 16 to 17 range generally, except in grade 4. In grade 4, they tick up to 20 and a half to 21 students. At the middle school, we're in the class size range in the 16 to 18 range. And at the high school, our 8th graders, I anticipate would be in class sizes roughly about 16, and our core academic classes would average in that 15 to 18, depending on the department. That doesn't mean that we don't have any class sizes that are above 18. We have some classes that, by virtue of how you schedule a high school, there are going to be some classes that are going to be in the mid-20s, and there might be some classes that are, that are down around 14, depending on, how many students sign up for a particular class. In terms of out-of-district placements, our out-of-districts have oscillated up and down right around 14 or 15. They were down as we were putting together the FY19 budget. As we look forward to FY20, we see this going up by 2 to 15 students. Out-of-district, the out-of-district students are these special education students with intense special needs. Not to be confused with students that are out of district to programs at Nauset or DY through school choice. This is actually, I think, a slide that speaks to some of the positives happening at Monomoy. Right now, if we look at this, we have our students that are choicing out of the district are going down. The students heading off to charter schools going down. The students that want to come into the district are actually going up. So, so it's, we're tracking in all the right directions when it comes to students, students and enrollment there. And despite the fact that we have the out-of-districts, our school choice out going down, the charter school going down, students wanting to come in going up, we're still seeing less enrollment, and that's a factor of just fewer school-age students in this region of Cape Cod. The decline we can see more appreciably right now at the elementary level. Our middle school, there's a bubble at Monomoy in the 6th grade right now, but behind 6th grade there's a declining enrollment. So I anticipate we're going to see fairly stable enrollments if we look over about the next 4 years at the school district. But once that 6th grade population gets into that sort of sophomore, junior, senior year, we're going to see the number of students overall in the district probably just trailing off unless we see more families moving to both of our communities. One of the factors that impacts a regional school district budget is excess and deficiency, and how we use excess and deficiency from one year to the next to help smooth out budget increases. In the current year's budget, we use $705,000 of excess and deficiency to help reduce the assessment on Harwich and Chatham. We had a conversation last year when we were here saying that we can't year after year use $705,000 or there won't be any reserve left. So this year's budget, proposal is to use $550,000 out of the excess and deficiency. So it's an account that, with $550,000 out of it, there should be roughly 1.5 million left in the account. It's an account that is equivalent to the town side on free cash, so there's some monies that would roll over into that in any given year. We also have a balance left in our school choice account, so these are tuitions that are coming into the school district. We use school choice monies to help offset some of our staffing costs. Likewise, circuit breaker are funds that come in when we're reimbursed for expensive out-of-district special education. We have a balance in that account and are using $191,000 of circuit breaker to help buffer the total assessment for the district. And lastly, the big number are tuitions out. So tuitions heading out for school choice and tuitions heading out for charter schools. Despite what I indicated that the total number of students are down, it is still a massive amount of money when it comes to the school department's budget. This is, there's $2.4 million of Monomoy's funds that head out to pay for charter school and school choice tuitions. As in past years, we've talked about, what are some of the budget obligation drivers. We anticipate that when the contracts are ratified, that there's about $369,000 of staff contractual obligations with this. There's $432,000 for the out-of-district special education expenses. While our active employees are a 0% increase when it comes to health insurance, we do have a small number of retirees, and the retirees going up by 3.7, that's another $35,000. Because it's a reduced staff budget, there are unemployment liabilities that we have to set money aside for, so we see insurance going up on that end. Barnstable County retirement goes up. We have a Essential Schools Health Grant that is ending, so we absorb that into this budget to the tune of $37,000. We anticipate that we have a placeholder for bus transportation going up by $160,000 or $157,000, where that's a 10% increase. We're actually cautiously optimistic that that's going to come in below 10%, but we're still working through the logistics with the transportation provider. And then finally, there is the final financing for Monomoy Regional High School is being done through a 3-year State House note, so there's an additional $56,000 there. In terms of continuation of strategic initiatives, we had in last year's budget in our presentations, we talked about allotting $20,000 for a community engagement coordinator. This on the slide here, there's a list of a number of things that the community engagement coordinator has been doing this year. In addition to, Joy Jordan had a big role in putting together the strategic planning community forum that we had earlier this fall. But she has been involved in bringing in additional tutoring and mentors. I know last time I was here, we were having the conversations to look towards a new school committee member, and I think Larry might have asked a great question. It's like, what can we do that's free? And I think a number of the people had responded, something along the lines of mentoring. Of course, one of the challenges with mentoring is who's going to go and coordinate and oversee that program, and that's one of the things that Joy's done a great job of getting off the ground, and we really hope that we can see volunteerism in the schools and a greater connection with our schools, and particularly the retiree populations in our two towns. We also have been really focusing on improving the ELA instruction happening at the elementary level. So there's funding that we set aside last year to start bolstering that ELA curriculum. There's funding in this current budget to do that. We also have in this budget money set aside to shift from a Spanish special at the elementary level to a science special at the elementary level. The specials are the activities that the students go to outside of their classrooms. So we have at the elementary level, there's technology, Spanish, gym, library, art, music, and this would be shifting the Spanish to a science. As we looked strategically from a district standpoint, the amount of instruction that students had been getting embedded in the classroom at Harwich Elementary School was really less than half an hour a week when it came to science instruction. We felt that we really needed to go and see that supported more, particularly given where this area is going in terms of the blue economy and just other science aspects, that we want to make sure that we're interesting students in and building that knowledge from the ground up. And at the same time, keeping that technology instruction. I think some people are kind of confused. You have technology, isn't that science? The technology instruction at the elementary level starts with, you can imagine, kids learning how to even just do basic keyboarding, but rather quickly learning how to use the computers to go and communicate and create. And it's neat to go into at Chatham Elementary School last year. I was they have this state fair science project, or a state fair project, and each one of the students had these little video vignettes that they had put together on their states. And to think that that something that might have been happening in a high school classroom a handful of years ago is now happening in an elementary classroom, and see where they're running with it has just been phenomenal. So all of that, and I anticipate that what we're going to see more and more, and this also shows up in the strategic plan, is to see coding starting to happen down in the elementary levels. Coding being that beginning or the basics of computer programming, because that's going to be key again for our local economy here when it comes to Massachusetts. But I think it's also one of those things that as technology keeps launching forward, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you can code, you can go and work here on the Cape, or find gainful employment out there with regard to coding. Other things that show up in this budget, we have additional supports are needed when it comes to clinical supports at our middle school. Middle schools, the one building we anticipate to be increasing significantly in enrollment next year. They need support when it comes to clinical counseling. They also need support and oversight of their special education, and the team chair does that. We have at the high school a growing population of English language learners, and you can imagine high school students needing to go and understand what's happening and all the different classes that they're taking, at the same time learning how to speak, read and write in English. So we need to add an English language learner teacher at the high school. We have a number of different initiatives that involve staff professional development, so we have some funding set aside for that. And lastly, given the number of English language learners in the district, we have included in this year's budget, or this upcoming year's budget, translation services, which we're finding more and more we need. So to not drone on too long here, but at the end of the day, the total budget, draft budget for FY20 is a $40,901,482 budget. The school committee ultimately votes a budget by category. That's why we include this slide here. We have in this budget funding for our continuation of upkeep for the buildings. One of the things that Katie and I have been quite proud of is that our elementary schools and our middle school are in better shape today than when this district came together. So we allocate each year $305,000 to keep the taxpayers' investment in those buildings. well taken care of. And we, if we look at how the funding is used, the bulk of a school district's budget are its personnel costs. There's 69.9% of the costs in a school district's budget and in our budget are personnel costs. Where the funds come from, just as in the Cape Tech budget, the bulk of their funding comes from assessments. In our case, 63.2% comes from the assessment for Harwich, 21.7% for Chatham, and then 8.6% of our budget is the Chapter 70 state aid. The next biggest piece is 3% of our budget are tuition that we receive from other school districts from students choicing into us. If you total up those budget categories and divide by 180 days, it costs $123.32 to educate a Monomoy student each day at school. We'll kind of skip over the percentages in each category and just jump to budget increase over the prior year. As I mentioned earlier, it's a 3% budget increase over the prior year. If you take out the $432,500 in out-of-district costs, it really equates to 1.96%. If we go from budget to assessment, and at the end of the day, it's the assessment that the Finance Committee and the town manager oftentimes wants to know, because that's the bill that the towns are paying to run the school district. The assessment is driven largely by the number of students in the foundation enrollment and that minimum required contribution. So as we mentioned, there's a shift in the minimum required contribution. Harwich's share to run the school district through that minimum required contribution went up by $638,961. Chatham's went down by $155,764. Again, the biggest thing driving those two changes is just number of children. I think in the slides that I gave you, the last two slides show how the state actually goes and does the advanced calculus. And if you look at it, the growth factors in both of our communities were quite strong and favorable. So property wealth and income wealth are things that the state looks at as influencing a minimum required contribution, but they were quite positive for both communities. The thing that tangibly was different was that shift in enrollment. So how that plays out with the assessment, you back out the Chapter 70 state aid, excess and deficiency, charter school reimbursements, you back out the transportation and capital and debt, because those are assessed separately down in the assessments. You come up with an operating assessment per community, which then has the required minimum contributions that are backed off that. The remainder is split along that 3-year rolling average of 73.45% for Harwich. That same factor is used when calculating debt and capital. You'll notice that for transportation, there's a 74.3% Harwich, and that's because transportation is done by the number of students from Harwich that are sitting in seats in the district. So that's a factor per the agreement that's done based on enrollment, not foundation enrollment. Ultimately, when you get to the punchline of the presentation on how is our assessment changing from FY19 to FY20, Harwich's assessment increase goes up by 4.47%. Chatham's goes down by 0.35%. And again, the difference between those is largely driven by a difference instantaneously in the 2019 or October 2018 enrollments that were feeding into the foundation enrollment in that calculation. I'll stop there and
Thank you, Scott. Finance Committee, do you want to?
Still go first?
You can go first.
On the 8.5 full-time equivalents coming out, you take out benefits for them as well? I noticed that you didn't on the health insurance, or it appeared as though you didn't.
Well, yes, we take them out, but you'll also see that there are additional people that we're gonna be hiring, and there were some new positions that are added, so there are some that are leaving that don't participate in benefits, and then in anticipation of some of the ads, we have to plan on them coming in with needing health insurance.
so it's a net reduction of 8.5 staff. So there's more than 8.5 that are being reduced to add a few others. So on the strategic additions, there's some additions there, but there's more than 8.5 reduction to land at a net 8.5 reduction.
It just seemed like on the health insurance, the town administrator, when he sent out his instructions, said you go up by 10%, and that was reflected originally, and then in the new number, it was back down to the old number, but nothing seemed to be coming out for the employees leaving. It doesn't seem to show up in any of the expenses either. All those kind of stay the same.
Not everybody that's leaving participates in our health insurance.
Okay. On the E&D account, is the FY18 money included in that 1.5 million? Is that's already in there?
It's certified,
But
yep.
but the FY19 is not yet. That would be new addition to the.
Right. It gets certified by October 31st.
I guess the only other comment I had is just having to see what I read in the paper about in January about the request for Harwich and trying to come in at the 3.25%. There was a comment about cost centers in town government have increased substantially. It would be nice to have some parity here, and that was from a school committee member. And I just remember the 5 years that we went with 0 increases in the town side budgets for employees, and all the sacrificing that went on the town side to get Monomoy off to a good start. It's real depressing to see a comment like that from a school committee member that doesn't understand what we did to get this school off to a good start. That's my question.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Scott and Katie. Just one question. What is our unfunded OPEB liability?
$23 million.
23 million.
And we have a balance of about $432,000 in that account.
Thank you.
I think if they looked at it, I think we're supposed to be contributing about $2 million a year, and we're contributing $100,000.
Close. Just takes longer.
Thank you. That's it.
Anybody else from Finance Committee? Yep. You can use the microphone in the middle there, or you can come up here, either way.
Hi, Dan Twark. Met you the other night. Scott, I have a question about the strategic plan.
Sure.
Okay. One of the key features with the strategic plan is how it aligns with your operations, so your operational plans, your organizational structure, that kind of thing. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on how your budget aligns with the strategic plan?
So what we've tried to do in a number of areas, and I think when it comes to some of the staffing changes, there are staff, I think, as Dana noted, there's 8.5 FTEs that are reduced, but it's a net 8.5. So we have looked at various areas to say, okay, where should we be shifting to get to where we want to be per that plan. We have, in some cases, it's one of the shifts from Spanish to science at the elementary school is beginning a sort of process on improving how the district is approaching science education. In the strategic, there's a whole slide that we had on the strategic enhancements that are within the budget. So the second to last one, I think, is tremendously important. And if you go through the strategic plan, there are several places where it talks about providing time for to train staff and do more training on differentiated instruction. So we hadn't had a placeholder for a concerted amount of summer curriculum work. We wanted to make sure that we were putting more money aside to say, okay, this year let's focus on differentiated instruction. Next year, let's go and start advancing things more on the social emotional learning front. So we see some of the training taking place on there throughout the strategic plan, and even I think the conversations that were happening the day of the community forum, there was a concern that we need to really focus, have some focuses on students and families who were not connecting to, in part because of language barriers. So we have this growing number of ELL, English language learners, that are happening in both of our two towns. And again, the translation services that show up here in the budget align nicely with that, as does the addition of the English language learner teacher within this budget. So it's you have those fronts. You have supports on when we look at children and their social emotional needs. What's happening when it comes to the clinical counselor and increasing that time at the elementary level, again, all fits into one of those strategic initiatives. So, so we really look at, and the reason that we kind of titled this slide, strategic improvements, is because each one of these things, it's new in this budget, but it definitely, you could crosswalk it to that strategic plan.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me. I think I'd like to ask a question about free cash. I think what I heard was that you have about $1.5 million of free cash. And I assume that you had to have another $1.5 million in next year's budget. I know the town has about $1 million in free cash in their budget. And that's all money that has been paid for by residents either through taxes or fees or whatnot. I don't know why both the town and the schools could not just take what is sitting there as free cash or whatever else you want to call it and reduce that total number by $800,000, $400,000, whatever, rather than having money sitting in a corner, which is going to just keep sitting in a corner and then have more money added to it the next year. And everybody looks at free cash as a wonderful thing. What it really is a mistake, because we've taxed too much and we've charged too much. Because if we were doing it right, we get a lot closer than $1.5 million. So maybe I'm using too high a number, but I think we've got to get to a point where we stop using free cash as a piggy bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Just to kind of point out, I flipped back to the excess and deficiency slide, which would be the regional school district's equivalent to free cash. I'll plead naivete and maybe have Bob could fill me in on what sort of constraints there are on how big a town-side free cash balance can be. But on a regional school district, our free cash can't go over 5% of our budget. So So when we reached back in FY17, 1.8 million in free cash, that's as high as it can get. At that point, we need to use that free cash, so it would roll back to the towns anyway in our budget process, and we felt that we were in a place to go and have more of it roll into the budget to help defray this past year's, or actually it would be the current year's operating costs. And I guess in general, in a regional school district about this size, you might see about 300,000 any given year rolling into free cash on some years, and we have other years that we've seen a little bit more if the governor has some funds coming back to the school district after town meeting. It ends up there. But we're, I think we thoughtfully tried to get the school district from a place when we started with no reserves to get to a place where there were some reserves to smooth things year to year. And so I understand where Angelo is coming from, that it's sitting there, well, why can't we use it? But I think we also look at it from a cautionary standpoint, is that something that we have to go and help smooth out one year to the next for our towns and our taxpayers too.
Dana?
Just a question on that. When you have the 550 designated for next year, does that go against certain line items, or is that just a general backstop, or how does that, how do you work with that in the budget?
It comes right off the budget number, so on the assessment number. So you have the total assessment number, and it's the first number that just comes right off the top of that.
But in terms of your individual line items within your budget,
No.
you're not designating where that 550 is going?
No.
In other words, you're not saying we're gonna buy something with it, or, okay, just wondering. Can we get a history of what the line items go into that number, right? I mean, in terms at the end of the year, you have line items that go into your free cash number, or your E&D number?
Right.
Can
Well,
we
at
get a
the end,
history of
yeah,
that, of
sure.
what's gone in each year? That would be something helpful for us. Thank you.
Two other quick little questions. One is on class size. Does the state have mandatory class sizes, or how do you arrive at your class sizes?
So the state doesn't. In fact, I think the class sizes that we have within our school district are wonderful when it, and I think depending on where you were at Chatham Elementary, the class sizes were 11, 12, 13, 14 students as the district was coming together, and some of the shell shock that I would have, or conversations that were increasing class size, but I would argue that at times 18 children in a classroom leads to better discussions and more peer interaction than a classroom of 11. Although I think you can, others could argue that it'd be wonderful if all of our class sizes could be that small. But I'm not somebody who thinks that. I think there's a magic number there where I think the magic of learning happens, gets too big, gets a little cumbersome, gets too small, gets a little isolating, and I think where we're at, when I first came here, the guidelines that we have in the budget presentations are guidelines that I talked to our school committee about on my first budget presentation to the boards, because it was, here we're trying to put together a new school district. What should that number be? What should we be striving for year after year? And that becomes a placeholder. You'll notice that there are some grade levels that go slightly above that, but on average, we're hovering around what those class size guidelines are.
Thank you, Scott.
Is that something that you as administrators and your school committee come up with, this class size number? I mean, obviously, if we increase the class size number, we need fewer teachers, which drives the budget down. And I don't want to get into a long, protracted discussion on that, but we can follow that up at a later discussion or something.
Yeah, so, well, each year, you can sort of predict, you know, we would roll up the number of students, and you could just kind of anticipate, here's what we'd see for class size, in the subsequent year at each of the grade levels. So, so it's something that you can generally predict. We also, will look at that class size number to say how many slots do we have available for school choice into the school district? Because if we have a class of 17 and we're saying, we want to be 18 plus or minus 1, it behooves us as a school district to go and take in some tuition dollars for the free seats, that are there. So, so it's used for planning purposes.
And just one last thing. On the charter school, we have roughly $1.2 million going out to charter schools. If we pride ourselves on the great education we're giving our Monomoy students, why are these students, and again, it's a long discussion that's not here, but $1.2 million, I guess, what are you as administration and school committee doing to keep those kids in our school system instead of outgoing?
I think perception is reality. And I thought one of the neat things at the last school committee meeting, we started off with the annual presentation of the Superintendent's Award for Academic Excellence. And I had the pleasure to present Perry Cuomo, who's one of our seniors, that award, a Harwich student. And so here's a couple little blurbs that kind of speak to what a Monomoy education could get. So Perry's transcript, he's taken every AP course we have. He's never gotten a grade less than an A. He has perfect math scores on the SAT, perfect AP scores, perfect MCAS scores. His transcript's impeccable. And his mom sent myself and the high school administration just the sweetest little email, and she talks about that they were considering for Perry, Nauset, Sturgis, Cape Cod Academy, and Monomoy, and felt that the culture that we've got going in that building was something that would resonate well with their son, and she worried at the time because he would have been sort of that first cohort marching off into that building. He was at Lighthouse Charter School prior to coming back to Monomoy, and they worried about the academic program. And I know when we were opening the high school, some were saying, why put in so many AP courses from start? Why don't just one at a time? But his mom noted that she was worried whether or not there would be the academic challenge and rigor there, and then she was just sort of recounting that. Clearly she had no reason to worry, that it was all there. And I think, again, it's that perception. I think the more people realize what we're able to do for the Perrys of the world and for each of these students that are heading off to some great schools, I think the more they'll sort of question, does my child really need to go travel 40 minutes into Hyannis to go to Sturgis versus stay right here? Or families that are looking towards Lighthouse Charter School, when the reality is, we have, our middle school has the highest accountability rating of any middle school on Cape Cod right now. So there's a lot of great things happening here at home, and I think in time you start to see perception change, and I think that's what we're starting to see as that charter school number goes down and school choice out starting to go down. That's perception changing.
Was at your school committee meeting when you did the accolades on that Perry. He's an exceptionally bright young man, but you didn't answer my question. What are we doing to get those 67 students back into our high school? Or grade schools, or whatever schools they go to.
All we can do is reach out to the families and let them know the programs we have in place. I think some of the challenges is once families leave, sometimes it's hard to get them back. And I think we were lucky in the case that many students, when they head off to Lighthouse Charter School, think that's something, you know, the grass is greener on the other side. And it's nice to, you know, to hear from one parent that, no, in fact, the grass right here at home was pretty great for our son.
Thank you.
Mark, do you have anything else from anybody, Finance Committee?
Thank you. Larry?
Let me just give someone else a chance, and I'll fill in my gaps.
Okay. Michael?
You mentioned the staff reductions, but then again, you're hiring people back. What's the actual staff reduction that you're after?
8.5.
8.5 is what you're reducing.
Yep.
And as Dana said, but not all those people are losing their benefits? Not all those people that you're replacing those staff with, there's gonna be people coming on that are gonna require benefits.
That's
So you're not reducing that number. What attempt did you make at reducing any staff on the administrative level rather than just on the teacher level?
So on the administrative level, one of the things that we talked about is reducing some clerical support at central office. One of the realities that we face is that as we shift towards the busing with Cape Cod Collaborative, we're going to have to absorb some sort of transportation coordination somewhere and either pay for it out of central office or pay for it with somebody in Osterville. And I think it makes more sense to have us absorb it. So I've had a conversation on my end with one of our staff people to say, you know, here's something I'm going to have you take on, and you know, for a significant chunk of the year, it's going to be almost a full-time job, but we'll be able to fund that out of transportation.
So speaking of elementary school Spanish, so page 40 of your presentation says reduce staff budget without reduction of any services or programs. So we're reducing Spanish on the elementary school level, if I'm hearing it correctly?
And adding science in its place.
So why did you make such an investment in the Spanish teacher that you recruited from Barnstable and who is still being paid to go to programs on Spanish through the end of this year? And now we're going to layer off and go into science and spend another $16,000 on program cost to start the science program.
Well, I think at the time it was looking, I think we weren't looking at, prior to holding the community forum, we weren't looking at a direction to go. It was, you know, what came out of the strategic planning process to say, hey, you know, we need to go and invest in more science in the district. So, you know, that's how, you know, that's how the shift from Spanish to science came about. The addition, or you know, we send all sorts of teachers to get lots of different trainings, and both of our Spanish instructors at the elementary level have some exceptional strengths. You know, so we were sending at the time, choosing to send some of our best people to get, you know, to get training in, and I believe it was like a Botvin life skills training that, you know, that was done. That you know, so it's not, you know, we're last year when we were looking at Botvin, we were looking at great people to go and send, and it's unfortunately when it came to Spanish, you know, we've got somebody who's nicely trained in Botvin, but also it's not science at the moment.
Okay, and on the unpredictable one-time cost, or this year's cost of $432,000, when do you get the reimbursement from the state on that, and where will that money go?
So again, it's unpredictable. It's not a one-time cost, and I think we have to keep that in mind, that when students go out of district, they tend to be out until they're age 22. Next year, we will get circuit breaker funding back for the tuitions that go out. It's just when you have a spike, you don't get the money back in circuit breaker from the state until the next fiscal year. It looks like because it is such a major increase in the out-of-district line that we may qualify for what's called extraordinary relief from the state. But that is even more unpredictable in that the state sets aside $5,000 for extraordinary relief. $5 million in extraordinary relief, and but all of the school districts who qualify then apply for that pool of money. So, so we'll see some, some money that will come back for that. And then I think the conversation, would happen at the school committee level. Do we put that into circuit breaker account? Do we look at, I think I've talked on my end, it might make sense for us as two towns and a school district to set up a revolving fund that could smooth out that when it happens again, because it will happen at some point in the future. It happened, a few years before I got here. It will happen again, and I think there are, those are what, if you've got a reserve account to help smooth that increase until the circuit breaker funding comes, that's lagged by a year, it puts you in a better situation so that I'm not having to talk to Chris to say, how do we go and resolve Harwich's share of $432,000.
Okay, and then last, page 64, you talk about transportation cost line item, 159,000. Can you talk to me about transportation costs and the new bus deal with the collaborative versus what we were traditionally using?
So
all of the numbers, please. Cost of the bus drivers, cost of maintenance, everything associated with it. Debt.
Well, I don't have all those numbers. So we went out to bid, just to give the history of that. We had a 5-year contract with our current vendor. We're in our last year of the 5-year contract. At the end, before we entered into the 5th year, we went out to bid, and we didn't have any bids, and we went out to bid again, and we received a letter from our current bidder that said thank you for the opportunity, but they chose not to bid on the contract, which the bid specifications were pretty similar to what they were. So we are now working with the Cape Cod Collaborative.
If I could interrupt you just real quick, didn't you go out to bid for a 3-year contract this time and required the buses to be new buses?
I did not. We did not. We went out for a 3-year contract, which we do always, with 2 1-year options. That's the way we go out to bid. The bid specifications indicated that the buses could not exceed 8 years and 150,000 miles.
Okay.
So we did not have a bid. We did not have for this contract, and we are working now with the collaborative to provide our transportation. And we've reached out to other communities on the Cape that have worked with the collaborative, Mashpee being one, Nauset now, Bourne. So we will be able to provide you with the breakdown of all of that. We are getting pricing for the purchasing and leasing of the financing of the buses. And this week on Wednesday, we're having a bus driver recruitment meeting, and we have invited all of our current drivers to participate in the recruitment meeting. We had an appreciation breakfast and been in contact with the current vendor. So when it all comes down, we will be happy to provide you with all the specific information.
But none of those specific numbers that we're talking about are in this budget?
The 10% increase is in the budget. And keep in mind, when we went out to bid last time, the current vendor that we have, the contract increased by 3%. So I was being cautiously optimistic when I projected a 10%. I've reached out to other business managers, and there have been contracts that have increased 23, 24% from one contract period to another. So I went what I felt was conservative with the 10% increase.
Okay, were you or anyone from the school talking to the collaborative before you put the bid documents out?
Well, we always talk to the collaborative,
About
because
buses?
in
Be
general,
specific.
yeah, but not specific. So,
based on, we've done some homework on this. I think it's been, Chris Clark went and met with you, Scott, about this, and we did get an email from him on this. Isn't it common knowledge that if schools are gonna go and work with the collaborative, that it's not advantageous for bus companies to bid?
I can't speak to that. I can't speak to that. If a vendor chooses not to bid, that's their choice.
I know Upper Cape Tech and Cape Tech just renewed with the current bus company, and we're very happy with their contract. It didn't look like their bid specs were quite the same as yours, but this is a pretty significant cost to the town of Harwich, right? A
Well,
difference?
they could have bid, and it could have come in higher than 10%.
But they could have bid, but again, if the collaborative's involved in buses, it doesn't make sense for most of these people to bid because of the way the collaborative works. Right? Scott?
I don't
You've
know.
had several conversations on this. I mean, you had a conversation with Chris. Doesn't that mean that it is not advantageous for them to bid because of the collaborative's program?
All I can say is, if we can't award a contract unless somebody bids.
Well, I would hope that you would consider, at least when you get these final numbers, going back out to bid, because this budget is, something's gonna have to give for the rest of the town of Harwich for us to support this budget. And we had this conversation last year. It was, I keep hearing, we're getting there, we're getting there, we're getting there. And I understand the one-time cost, Scott. Well, not one time, but the unpredictable cost. I get that. But I don't get the busting, and I don't get some of these layoffs with, your chart doesn't show administrative increases, but I think Don will get to that question. We want to know percentages of raises given to administration. And I'd like to see kind of the rationale behind 2 principals at the high school, a 625 school high school, and how that compares to other districts before we're laying off Spanish teachers and eliminating programs for our elementary school kids.
Thanks. Did you want to go now,
Sure.
Larry?
All warmed up? Thank you. I too had concerns about the bus contract. And I had it because, and I get different stories on this, but I get it because I'm trying to understand performance bonds and how that didn't allow our current vendor to bid on that because of the mechanisms of that. But my greater concern is it seems like you've gone a direction with no knowledge of what the finances would be. I don't know how you could compare one to the other when you don't know it, you haven't got the information yet. And so and I think always we're supportive of our local businesses. We get either applauded or criticized for that. But that's a concern, but mainly from the school budget. You have 10%. My concern is also what makes up that number? How much of that are we picking up in debt? I understand you have to spend like a $1.5 million to buy buses. It's through the collaborative, but we pick it up. And so that's going to add to the operating expense. So I'd like some clarification too how it works out. But it's a big change. Also, as my understanding is that people are pretty happy with the bus drivers they had now in the service.
And they've been invited to the meeting on Wednesday.
And to make a change without any firm idea of improvement, I guess, is what my concern is. And so I would like to, follow up on that. Let me ask you a couple, I don't want to, and that's not on that. The 3-year bonding that you mentioned, that we're paying back, and what was that for, in addition to what we?
So when we went out to, keep in mind, when we did the building project, at the time that the building was being built, the towns approved a $36 million financing to bond the building.
Right.
We bonded only 28 million, but after everything was
Okay,
said and
I'll
done.
take that.
However, the building project just finished up in October. And after we received our final payment from MSBA, there's a $240,000 additional amount that needs to be paid towards the building of the high school. And so
those were increases in what you did, or just an increase in cost?
No. So when we reached a 95% reimbursement rate back in 2015, we did not receive any more payments from MSBA. And then when you go through the whole audit process, we didn't know at the time if we possibly, and we had this in all of our public presentations, that we were thinking that we may have to actually finance $500,000 after all was said and done, based on what we would be getting reimbursed from MSBA. It ended up that it was $240,000, and we're going to be financing that over a 3-year period of time using what's called a State House note.
Okay. And then that then shows up in your debt figure that you
Yes.
show up here.
Larry, could I just mention something?
Sure.
going back, I think it's important, I'm the chief procurement officer for the district, and we go out to bid for all kinds of things in terms of supporting. We went out to get a district electrician, and we have an electrician that we hire that's local. We went out to bid for HVAC services, and we have a company that, locally, not necessarily on the Cape, that does our HVAC system. We went out to bid for plumbing service. This is just a routine thing that we do. Never mind all the bidding that we went out for the building of the high school. Went out to bid for the building of the concession stand. And it's unfortunate that a routine business practice that we went out to bid for this bus transportation has taken on a life of its own, when all of the procurement laws, all of the processes, procedures, opportunities to ask questions were presented.
I appreciate that. I guess one of my questions, or I hope what would happen, would be some discussion between the companies. So it seems like there's none of that happened. Because it looked like there was some misunderstanding, at least miscommunication, maybe misunderstanding going forward, whether it was rumors, whether it was performance bonding, that could have been sorted out with just a brief discussion. But I appreciate your effort on it.
Thank you, Larry. Ed?
Well, just a comment to review the financing of the high school. When we went out to fulfill our major chunk of permanent financing, we did it at that time because we saw the interest rates going up, and we were at a point in the construction where we had spent nearly 95% of the costs we were going to incur. And at the time we went out and we hit a very favorable bond market, and we were retiring $30 million in the short-term.
Bands?
The bands, bond anticipation notes, and we went out to bid. Not only did we get a good interest rate, but we are on the books now for $28 million in bonds, and we received a $2 million bond premium, which we used immediately to pay off $2 million of our costs. That was provided by the investors, so we did quite well there. And then we needed to wait because we didn't want to sell the bonds that would put us in excess of the cost of building the building, because it becomes very involved to unwind that process and get yourself back down to only the costs that you incurred, because you can't carry bonded debt for over what you spent. So using continuing to roll the little amount we had left over in bands till we got to find out what the final reimbursement rate from the state was going to be, and what our last little nut was going to be, which turned out to be $240,000, which was much better than we expected. So, I guess, another comment, I had heard a lot of rumors about, the bus contract, many of which I've found to be false, that were going around in the community, and it's unfortunate that occurred, about how that process worked. But, when you come down to it, whether you think somebody might have an inside track, many contractors on our building project might have thought Mr. Hour's company, being the local, would have had an inside track, but it was their choice of whether they wanted to bid or not. I'm not saying that Bobby Hour's company did, but if a company doesn't bid, they don't bid. So we'll never know. So as you mentioned earlier, the OPEB funding, even though we have very few people that will be receiving those post-employment benefits from this. You're still projecting a sizable amount of unfunded liability. Is there any other strategy than going from $100,000 to $2 million in annual payments to cover that cost?
I think one of the challenges is that we don't have a revenue source that you could then, have a tax that you could then, so, as a matter of fact, at the conference I went to, there was a performance, presentation on how regional schools could fund that, and sometimes it has to do with, like, if at the end of the year, some of the districts, if there happens to be a balance unexpended in a insurance expense line for your active or retirees, you just take the balance of that and put it into the OPEB, but that's part of a conversation you have to have with your districts.
Okay. And then I guess on our current school budget, what's the allowable percentage in current dollar figure in excess and deficiency?
Just about $1.9 million.
And we're down
Yeah.
at 1.5, which is in essence a reserve account. It doesn't mean that we're putting 1.5 million in that account every year. It's just what's there.
Right.
It's only the essentially turnbacks from operations that go in and excess revenues that we receive that go into that account, and then you make a determination how much out of that account you can spend to support the next year's budget while still retaining a prudent amount for whatever unforeseen issues may come up. Thank you.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm going to start with the fifth question first, since this is the near-term one. Just to couch this, since you brought forward your own expertise, I spent 8 years in the federal government with unlimited signature warrant dollar value authority. That figured it averaged about $50 to $100 million a year, depending on what year you were talking about. So with that, there's what you need to do because the law tells you, and there's what you would probably want to do. So the question I have is, and I know it was answered before, but there are pre-bid conferences and there are pre-bid conferences. Did you have a pre-bid conference to sit down to ascertain why you were absent any competition on the first go-around? Or was this a pre-bid conference where clause 1 says you do this and clause 2 says you do that? Normally, because of the scope of a contract, if you're not getting competition, you'd want to know if there's something you had written into the contract to determine whether or not that was off-putting to the vendor.
I did not have a pre-bid conference. In the past, there was a mandatory pre-bid conference, and I did not have that because I didn't want to have that. This was 5 years ago. The nature of bus contracts in Massachusetts are such that the significant percentage of school districts, only one bidder bids on their contract at any time. I was very optimistic because we have some new vendors on the Cape, that there was going to be a little, good old-fashioned bid, that there'd be all, 5-star, as well as our current transportation provider for a student. And I had a lot of interest from people that called. I sent out the specs to numerous vendors. There wasn't anything markedly different in these bid specs than 5 years prior. So I think I did my due diligence.
Okay, but you really still don't know what might have caused them to not wish to execute a bid.
I don't.
And the other observation I'm making, it isn't to this front table, it's to the committee itself. I would have been real interested in going to see that kind of discussion, but at the time that it happened, given the comment about rumors, I didn't see an agenda item that would have led me to believe that that conversation was going to happen on the first instance. So, I mean, in the future, especially since you don't have any money of your own unless it's derived from us and the other town, it would be nice to know that such a discussion was coming up before you go pretty far down a road. The other questions, some of these are pretty simple, and a couple of them you're not going to be able to answer right now, but I'm still interested in the answers since I was the one who originally brought up the central office staffing. Apparently, the whole message didn't get through, and Michael was right. I've got some questions relative to that. The first one, though, just as an overview, from your own figures, you're still north of 5% if you include the capital expenses over the 6 years. If you take them out, you're looking at a 26% over the range of year 0, to 1, to the current request. So that comes out to about 4.33% a year on average. You are making an effort to put the brakes on, but that's what the number is. And since all of the school committee people were asked that question, and none of them seem to know, that's what the number is. It's 26% over, including the new request. Does that include your assumptions on the final numbers for the teacher pay increase?
This budget does? Yes.
Okay. I mean, you said something about contractual obligations, but you didn't come right out and say, yeah, that's what we've agreed to and it's in here.
Right, until it's ratified, we can't.
I'm just curious because there are a number of ways you can amortize money, and everybody's been talking about classroom sizes and everything. I'm looking more, even above the 30,000 mile range. As far as I'm concerned, first question is, last year, how many kids were at the graduating ceremony and handed diplomas?
I don't know the exact number, about 120.
Okay. Where I'm heading is, overall, your buildings hold a capacity of X number of kids.
The high school, 700.
I'm looking ultimately for basically a two-axis thought here. How many kids at maximum each of your buildings hold? How many are they currently holding in terms of teaching? And that brings me to the overhead part of this. And I did ask that question originally. I'm interested in knowing the number of employees who are non-teaching. Doesn't matter where they are. And as a subset of that, how many of those are central office? Now, you gave me some of that, but they're sprinkled all through different slides. I'm trying to look for some succinct presentation of that, over the past 5 years, and what dollar value that associates itself with. So the first year, it would be X number of employees, non-teaching, at, and then this current proposal would be X number of FTE at. So it's both the number and the dollar figure and where they're populated.
No, you mean like in all the categories, like custodial, secretarial, or are you just talking administrative?
Administrative, but I want to break out the central office staffing.
Okay.
So, at a dollar value as well as an FTE staffing level.
Okay.
Because it's kind of hard to know, because the assessments are going to vary, because it depends on who's contributing what in any given year from which community. I get that. And I'm not even interested in looking at that, because that is what it is. If we have more kids coming into the school, we pay more.
Right.
It's the overall operation of the school and how that amortizes over a total student population base that I'm interested in, and how many of those people are actually in front of a kid teaching, and how many of those are doing support work and or central office work, and at what dollar value.
Dawn, if you look, and I'm wondering, just to clarify the question, because I want some similar information. Slide 31, that talks about comparative budgets by category,
Yeah,
further
but
breakdown.
they're sprinkled throughout. I want to get on one sheet of paper, like I said, the total building capacity for each of the buildings, because that adds up eventually in terms of what you're spending. And then getting into direct service student, teacher, obviously, or a teacher's aide, as compared to what other support staff, over the whole system that you're using. Because the building wouldn't necessarily be as pertinent, since I'm assuming you could wiggle a person by sending them to 1 or 2 school buildings if they were doing something that wouldn't have taken an FTE 40-hour week to do. You could probably make them migrate from building to building. So I can't make that anchored to the building. That has to be like, for the system, how many people do you have that, that aren't associated with direct teaching? And the dollar value for that.
Is that it? Well, so to follow up on that, I'm looking for a breakdown in the sense of, on slide 31, where it talks about the district leadership and administration salary and wages are 688, 653, which shows no change from last year. And then the instruction salary and wages, which are 18,549, 753, which is similar to last year. But then there's instruction expenses, so I'm wondering if that's, softwares and such, I would assume, right?
Right.
And then there is a jump, though, other school services and expenses. So that looks like from FY 2015, we were at 1525,209 and went up to 1988970. I'd like to understand what's categorized in other school expenses. And I would also like to understand, and again, there's probably valid reasons, I just would like to understand the numbers, is the number currently at the FY '20, 1,880,765 for operations and maintenance expenses versus 1,501,620 in 2015. But one that catches my eye, and again, you may be very well able to explain this, but FY 2015, under operations and maintenance salaries and wages, we went from 1,072,424 to 1,417,113. So I just want to understand those numbers and how we got there, not to say that, we shouldn't be at them, but to understand how we got there and what they actually constitute. To Dawn's point, if these are full-time employees, the numbers of, what types of positions, if so, or what types of technology or whatever, to make sure that, we understand what is incorporated in that number. So
And I'll give you a broad, and we'll provide you with all the detail, but just to give you a kind of a broad brush here. So if you look up on the 1000s, you can see that there's a 900, under FY 17, the very first district leadership, I'm going to just say 900, in FY 17, you see, actually I should say 18, $945,000, and now you see 688. But down in the 4000s, you see 1.1, and then it's up to 1.4. These numbers, they're called cost centers, and I can provide you with the backup information. Every year, the Department of Ed, we have to design our account structure based on the Department of Education's chart of accounts. And there's been some recent review of the chart of accounts because a lot of them have been stagnant since about the 90s. So last year, that affected FY 18, the Department of Ed redid all of their accounting for professional development. The difference is that all of the changes that they made all took place within the 2000 series. So within the 2000 series, there were some changes, but it didn't impact a whole cost center such as that. But with the 1000s and the 4000s, this past year, which affected 19, they recategorized technology. And they took a whole new look at how they wanted us to report technology. And what used to be some district-wide expenses for technology, it's now in the 4000s. So I can provide you with all that information, but at a glance, that's one of the things that comes in when one goes up and one goes down.
And do we have a grant writer that applies for any types of, grants in terms of, I'm just thinking out loud, but technology and different types of?
We do have a lot of people whose eyes are on those kinds of things. And unfortunately, a lot of the grant funds go to districts that are a little more needy than our districts, or larger from a student enrollment. But there was some information that came out today that there might be some changes in some grants. And we keep it all. We don't have a grant writer, but we have very active people, technologies, special services, the principals, myself, belonging in professional networks, keeping an eye out for that. There's supposed to be some safety money that we're still waiting for that would improve some infrastructure things that we haven't quite seen yet.
Most administrators have been involved in writing a grant with, for one thing or another. Even myself, I was working with Deputy Chief Gagnon, writing a safety grant that ultimately we didn't see, but it's, it's Principal Oldeck over at Harwich Elementary School reaching out on, sidewalk improvement to, for sort of safe, safe way to get kids to school.
Well, I would echo, the other board members' concerns in the sense that we are, we've all been very supportive of the schools, and we hate to lose educators and such that are in the classrooms and, educating the kids. And ultimately, if we're looking at ways to, consolidate and better use our administrative tasks, it sounds like you're doing that with the bus. Instead of hiring somebody to collaborate and coordinate, if you're going down that route, then ultimately, you're going to have somebody in-house try to do that without adding another job. I understand that, you're trying to look at all these avenues. But to the point of hearing that we're losing Spanish, which may have very well brought people to our district, is concerning. So I hope that we're able to, look hard at all of these pieces and understand the numbers better as well. Dana?
Just to be clear, this is still your budget, right? It's, the school committee hasn't voted it yet. And what's the timetable on that, or?
So we have, tomorrow night, we're having the public forum.
And will you state what time that's at the community center, right?
At the community center at, it's on that, there's the slide, the first slide. And then on Monday, so community center, we don't have the time.
Yeah, I don't think the time's on there. Right?
February 5th. And then on Monday, we'll be going to the Board of Selectmen in Chatham. And then on Tuesday, the Finance Subcommittee in Chatham. And then the school committee will be having the public hearing on the budget on February 12th. So everybody's welcome to come. And then the vote will take place on March 14th. We have to have a budget voted at least 45 days before town meeting.
Okay,
So that's where it is right now.
thank you. Larry?
Carolyn may know when there's going to be at the community center.
Meeting's tomorrow at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Thank you, Carolyn.
Well, that's when they reserve the room.
Okay, thank you.
Just one comment. We all struggle in grant writing. If you're a business, you have someone, because that's a spatial skill. Maybe something we need to explore is maybe we could work together and find some funds so we get a grant writer for the schools and for the towns. And we don't need full-time, but we're not doing the things that are actively, looking for grants.
Right.
People, everyone, you do it, our directors try to do it when they see it. But we don't have a formal process. So I'd like to throw that into something maybe we could work together on and establish some type of grant writing position or service.
On a smaller scale, we have some very supportive, the Cape Cod 5 has mini grants that teachers can apply for, and we also have, there's the Art of Charity that, so there are small pockets that provide nice support, but when you're talking like big ticket items.
Yeah, I'm looking for
right.
people to watch the Federal Register and watch all this stuff to
Right.
see what's out there. We don't have anyone actively doing what you would do in a business if you were looking after contracts, for instance. And we should.
Ed?
Yeah, Harwich did have a grant writer quite some time ago in 1977, 78. He was federally funded, and his name was Mark Forrest. He worked down in the basement with the safes before
You're saying we could pull him from
this
Brewster or
addition
Getty Back?
was put in.
It's almost done.
He has to pass here on the way from Brewster.
Well, thank you. Oh, sorry, John.
Yeah, just on the way out, because I didn't hear anybody actually bundle this whole thing. Regardless of where you are with your transportation at this point, it's hard to tell with what you got there, but it's just to make sure I've got apples to apples. You don't have any rolling stock. I mean, the bus company you had rolling stock, so you're going to have to come up with rolling stock. You're going to have, the bus company you had a repair facility, and you don't have that, so you're going to have to come up with a repair facility. You're going to have to staff it with somebody, so that's another change. I'm not sure whether you're paying for the fuel or they're paying for the fuel, but I'd like a breakdown of the overall cost and where it's in this. Because I don't, off the top of my head, I don't see how 10% can get you into $1 million worth of buses and a repair facility and maintenance people. That's not even to address what your pay scale would be for the drivers. So ultimately, I'd like it broken down and shown where that is in this.
Ed?
Well, I guess the question is in your current contract, is part of the contract amount include leasing of buses and, you know, so all of those things were built into the current contract.
Right.
And it's 10% over that amount, so there is an allowance in what you're predicting it'll cost going in.
No, she just said that
Yeah.
you're not allowing the age of the bus fleet that they've got, so that would surely indicate you're talking about turnover on that lease.
I think we just need the information.
Yeah, I
Right.
think once we have the specifics, sorry, Ed, that, you know, we're looking for the details to understand what the true cost is gonna be from soup to nuts.
Right.
And that's what we need
Destinations
to
weren't providing
understand.
the buses for
I mean,
free.
it's your
They were
budget, but
charging
we'd
them.
like to understand that.
They're gonna be new.
You know, and I mean,
Those
the
are
other thing I would ask is, you know, is it
Can be
really
up to
too
8
late to
years
go
old.
back out to bid? I mean, is,
And theirs
you
are
know,
pretty
so,
much at
you're saying it is?
But
We
there are
have
a
to
lot of
have
buses
buses
on the market
for
that
July
you can
1st.
get.
under eight.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I thank you, and thanks for taking the time. We look forward to receiving the information requested. Dana, do you need to-
Companies have
No,
buses
we'll,
they need to get rid of.
First students.
Close our meeting, we're adjourned.
Shift them
Okay,
anywhere.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, wastewater updates, memorandum of understanding with Department of Environmental Resources and the Harwich Conservation Trust, Coldbrook Project, Dennis Harwich, Yarmouth, David Young, CDM Smith.
Mr. Young is walking in.
You know,
Good evening, David.
It just, we always try to get a good price out of them for buses for the festival, but give it away free from the Conservation Trust, and we always got raped as a local organization.
You don't need to take the same amount as the school. Just saying.
Whenever you say you're droning on, stop.
Don't have a buzzer, do
Lightning round.
Excellent.
Well, I'm glad you saved the more exciting for the end. Good evening, David Young with CDM Smith, and with me here tonight, Mike Judici, who's our project manager for the Phase 2 sewer program. We were asked to come in and give you updates on these 4 topics, as I understood it. If there's something else, we'd be happy to try to answer, but this is what we had prepared for our agenda tonight. So with that, we'll start in.
Great, thank you.
Okay. The first one is to talk about where we are in the Phase 2 sewer program, so I thought I'd have Mike just walk through a couple of the slides.
Okay, again, for the record, Mike Judici, CDM Smith. Glad to be here. Just wanted to give you a quick update. The schedule is one that we prepared probably a little over a year or so ago. We have not changed it. We are on schedule based on this original schedule from last year. We are on budget as well, which obviously is good news. Don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I know there's a lot of information to cover. But the next slide are just a couple of highlights that we wanted to just make you aware of if you weren't already. The first, as you may or may not know, on October 15th, we submitted, along with the plans and specs, a complete SRF application to DEP to get the towns in line for SRF funding that they had already been approved for. Working closely with DEP as they review our documents, have since submitted a supplemental set of documents more up to date since the October submittal, so they're working through those plans and specs at the moment, addressing comments as they come in. There's some additional documentation that we need to get to them, and we're in the process of putting that stuff together. We suspect that they'll probably finish up that review process sometime this month, by the end of the month, putting us in line to bid the first contract the beginning of March. So that's where we're anticipating. As you probably know, this phase was divided up into 2 separate construction contracts. Contract 1, as I said, will probably be put out to bid the first week of March or so. Second contract probably a week or 2 after that. We want to stagger them just to give the contractors a little more time to review them and put put their bids together. We have been before the Conservation Commission. We had a hearing back on January 16th, I believe, for 2 of our pumping stations. We have 6 pumping stations in these 2 contracts. 2 of them were within jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission, so we submitted a notice of intent. They opened the public hearing a couple of weeks ago, and then we'll be back this Wednesday, the 6th, to hopefully have the hearing closed and get the order of conditions issued. Just one other item related to 2 of the pumping stations. We will have to go before the ZBA for variances. There's some setbacks that we're unable to meet, trying to minimize the impact to the adjacent properties and locating the pumping stations in a certain portion of the property so that they have the least amount of impact, and in doing so, it's going to require a couple of variances in terms of setbacks. We have regular meetings with Chatham. We just had a meeting last week with them. They're working in parallel to get their first contract out to bid around that same time frame. As you know, our contracts will tie into the Chatham system in 5 different locations down along Queen Anne Road. So we've had some close coordination with them for the last year or so. And that's basically where we stand. Quick overview. Again, don't want to spend a lot of time, but obviously happy to answer any questions either now or at the end, as you see fit.
Yeah, just one other addition to that. Based on the submittal, you're probably aware the town received a letter from DEP indicating you probably qualify for 0% interest loan versus 2%, so that's certainly excellent news.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That ties in, before you move on to Colebrook. It's something that you're not necessarily privy to, but the public is. For those people who voted on Phase 2, committed to bonding for it, and may have expected that they're already paying for that, we have yet to go out for any kind of borrowing at this point in time. So anybody who's sitting there at home understand that their tax bill now does not reflect Phase 2 in any way. The other thing, I was hoping for a little bit of help, and I'm not sure whether, because you folks said you're in ongoing talks with them, we've been talking about trying to mitigate the expense of a hookup since we modeled our agreement after Chatham's, and they were using engineers, and we were hoping for sanitarians. So anything you could do to help bolster our argument that they're not necessarily going to be getting inferior service by doing that would be helpful.
Well, I think we've indicated to town staff, town administrator, that there's very few towns that require a professional engineer to do that connection. And
You don't have to convince us, you have to convince Chatham.
Well, no, we worked with your town council, who I think wrote the opinion which was our opinion, that, because we were involved in writing your intermunicipal agreement, that you do not need Chatham's approval to do that and implement that. It in no way impacts the wastewater in the pipeline, which were the reasons, if you made changes, they wanted you to go back. But that does not impact that, and as your council wrote, they do not believe that they need to do that.
Without disparaging him, since he's not here, there are times when we have disagreements, and the fact is that it's modeled after Chatham's agreement,
I'm not your
and
legal
Chatham's
advice.
does not explicitly allow that. So we would need some sort of acquiescence, unless we plan on marching at him with pitchforks and torches and telling him that we've got a legal opinion. It would be better if they said, yeah, fine, it's okay.
I believe they're in the process, from last discussion, they're in the process of doing the same thing.
Correct. So they're going down that same path as well, so there've been discussions between Chris and Bob Duncanson and Chatham about getting some sort of a letter on that.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else you want to go?
One to Colebrook?
Sure.
Okay. So you asked for an update on where we are with just the Colebrook Natural Nitrogen Attenuation Project. This is the cranberry bogs owned by the Harwich Conservation Trust down off of Bank Street. Shown in the left-hand side is the actual, it's in the Saquatucket watershed. So we're on the lower left of those sort of yellowish lines.
and shown in the red is the actual Bank Street bog area. And then if you highlight on that area, this is the so-called consensus plan that was developed over the last year, working with the town, ourselves, working with the Harwich Conservation Trust, the Department of Ecological Restoration, DER at the state, and several other state agencies involved, including DEP and others. So this is the plan that will ultimately move forward and be designed. This is a conceptual plan. So a lot of details still to be worked out, such as how deep the ponds are and what have you, but a good concept there, and as we were in to discuss a few months ago, it meets the goals of the town for trying to get from 30% natural nitrogen removal up over 50%. So with that, working with town administration, we drafted a first pass at a memorandum of agreement, since the town needs to sign a document with the owner, Harwich Conservation Trust. We modeled it off of a couple other agreements that you've already utilized with Chatham, a couple agreements that we had from other examples as well. I believe you've seen copies of that draft in your packets. I'd be happy to discuss any comments you have or want to share with that tonight. But it's been sent to Harwich Conservation Trust and DER. They're reviewing it. And the biggest discussion items, I think, now are sort of the term of the agreement. We had written it as a draft to cover through the construction period and then do a second one that would cover the long-term monitoring and if any mitigation issues were needed down the road, so to speak. You may recall one of the issues was if something happens to the ponds, Harwich Conservation Trust wanted to make sure they weren't stuck with the issue. And the town has already publicly stated that they would work with them to make sure anything that needed to be done to address those issues would be done. So the other item is the cost sharing. We want to make sure that that is well documented, justified, and so there are no percentages put in there. There's been some concepts traded back and forth as to how to develop that cost sharing, particularly in the design phase, and then ultimately the bigger dollars, the construction phase. So we'll certainly be back to you with that recommendation. And the Harwich Conservation Trust is, again, working with DER, Division of Ecological Restoration, who was in the process of procuring their final designer for this project. So even though there's been a couple of one monthly meeting in person and then a couple monthly meetings, just general conference calls, the process hasn't really started, which is envisioned to be over the next year, 18 months, with construction projected to start in the fall of 2020. So a year from this fall. So that's essentially where we are. I'd be happy to answer questions if you've looked at the draft MOA, or we can address some of those as we come back with those other two items that we're working on.
Thank you, David. Larry, you have any?
Thank you, Mike and David. Yeah, it's been a while since I reviewed the draft MAA. You did put in some, I'd asked that we put in some monitoring to ensure we get to the 50% item that, Dave, you mentioned. Let me ask you, is it possible, the controversy or the negotiation, if you will, has been, excuse me, how deep the pond should be? Because that, to a large extent, drives how much nitrogen mitigation we receive in this composite system. You've mentioned that has not yet been worked out. Can you give us some what-ifs if the ponds, if this configuration takes place, what the modeling looks like in terms of how close we are to achieving our goal? If it's more, if it's a little deeper, so we understand what the downside is if we don't get near our goal of nitrogen mitigation, how close we are, in at least the modeling part of that.
Yeah, just
because then I'm concerned about if we don't do that, then do we have any are there any fixes? Do we go back in and try to, redo part of it, which would be extremely expensive? So I'd like at least on the modeling, to make it conservative as we can to meet, see if their goal, but also our goal, and not cut it too close. I'd like to see some of those results going in, I think.
Well, just to refresh everyone's memory, as you can see, this area in here is roughly where 60% of the groundwater enters the system. So that's why the ponds are located in what I refer to as the elbow. This lower third of the area will actually turn into a marshland area, and that will also provide significant nitrogen removal. So the way the consensus plan has been left is those ponds are envisioned to be in the 1.5 to 2 meter depth range, and the area sizes have been roughly estimated. But all those other details, whether there's a shelf going into them and what have you, are all to be worked out in the final design phase.
Right.
And we have Dr. Brian Howes and Ed Eichner, who have done the previous report studies with us, the 2 years' worth of pre-monitoring, so we know what the background levels of nitrogen removal are. They're on the team. They've looked at other ponds around the Cape as part of doing the Mass Estuaries Project work. So they have a history of what certain size ponds at certain depths have produced for nitrogen removal. Those are just 2 parameters. There's a lot of parameters that go into this, and it's truly a science and an art. It's not a hard and fast cookbook.
I appreciate their expertise and your expertise. I still would like to see what their best estimate is, and what assumptions are, what the range is to get us there.
Mm-hmm.
So we reduce the risk of it not happening. Because it is, as you say, there's a lot of factors. There's the depth, the residence time, the marshland.
Right.
It has to come together, but I feel, we talk about science versus Spanish. I tend to be on the science side. I always like to see a little data going into this rather than just, say, well, the experts are looking at it. If you're doing it, if you could provide that, that'd be nice.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you have any questions, Tom? Michael?
No questions. Maybe we could recognize Michael Locke from Harwich Conservation Trust is in the room.
I recognize
Thank you,
him.
Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Sounds like he's a concert.
We'll move on then to the update on the Dennis Howard Yarmouth DHY Clean Waters Partnership. 2 of your board members have been very active in the subgroup discussions, along with town administrator. And so they've already seen the update that I'll provide, but they can also chime in with anything I miss or gloss over to put emphasis points on. I think the news of this cost overview is very positive, but let me go through it. And if I go too quickly on any aspect, feel free to stop and ask a question. This table just summarizes by phase, roughly, the 3 communities, how they would tie in to the DHY partnership. From a flow aspect, we're trying to line them all up, but as you know, you folks have already started being in the middle, so it shows you'd be sending, roughly 300,000 gallons to Chatham that would not go to the DHY partnership. So you'd be sending a little under 1 million gallons. Ultimately, Dennis is around 2 million gallons, and Yarmouth is roughly 3.2 million gallons. However, they are looking at options of, similar to what you're doing, sending some flow from the western side of Yarmouth, the Lewis Bay area, potentially to Barnstable. So this depicts the combined sewer service areas and some revised phasing. If you actually look at this closely, it shows some revised phasing for Harwich as well, based on input from your representatives. Certainly, this needs to be, had some more public input to it. But what it does is it takes advantage of some Mass Highway Department projects that are going to be done on the Route 28 area in the Herring River watershed. And building the treatment plant, if you start to pay your share, it makes sense that you would want to start to send some wastewater there in that phase as well. So that's why a small section in this has been moved to Phase 3, and the second portion of construction up in Pleasant Bay has been bumped back one phase to Phase 4. Just a concept, but that's where we are now, and that's what's factored into the cost that we're presenting forward. And then we would do some other areas. Phase 5 has been readjusted, but that would pick up the rest of Route 28 down in this area. The common facilities, again, for DHY are potentially a common pumping station here at Route 134 and 28 in Dennis. So Harwich would feed into the Dennis system, Yarmouth would feed into the Dennis system, and then from that point, a pumping station, force mains up to the treatment plant located at the Dennis DPW site, and then force mains out to the various effluent recharge sites would be what is part of the DAY partnership. Again, 70% of the cost and the program remains in town, being the collection systems fully under your control. This is a concept plan of what the area requirements would be up at the Dennis DPW site for the DHY partnership treatment plant. This is at build-out. The first phases would probably build what's known as 3 sequencing batch reactor tanks, with 2 more added over time. The good news is that of these common shared facilities, the overall savings is about 34%. That's some significant money by the 3 communities working together. Now, you all say, well, what does it mean to me? Because that's what everybody wants to know. So if you get into the details and breakdown of that, this table summarizes, again, the shared facilities, meaning mainly the treatment plant and effluent recharge sites and associated facilities for those 2 components, not the collection systems. You can see the capital cost here. The town, that's what your share of the town facilities for those would be, and this is what it would be by doing the partnership. So you can see significant dollar savings, because instead of building your own treatment plant and everything that goes with that, you're paying your share, your 15% or so of that. And then that flows over to the cost savings in the operation and maintenance. We did a simplified equivalent annual cost just by taking the capital one time, spreading it over 30 years at a 2% interest loan. But more importantly, this shows the breakdown of the percent savings by community. And even though it's 34 overall, Harwich is at the top at about 48%. So that's some significant savings by participating in this 3-town partnership. Again, this is on the shared cost for treatment. Now, everybody wonders, how does that break down even further versus just capital and O&M, because it is different within each community. This is the Dennis program. And I would point out that the collection system here, this is into their full program cost now, but the collection system is about the same, because they're conveying wastewater within Dennis as they would have normally done. Their savings is in the treatment plant, again, similar to what you have, and then more importantly, in the O&M cost of the treatment plant. They do save some because they're sharing with other other partners in the effluent recharge, but that's really where their 2 big savings are. Now, Harwich, it actually costs you a little bit more because you're not conveying to your treatment plant at the DPW site, so your collection system went up about $5 to $7 million overall. But you saved almost $40 million in your treatment plant. again, because you're not building everything associated with it, you're only paying your percent share of that, and then again, significant O&M savings there. So your savings is really at the treatment plant. Effluent recharge, you're paying your share of the different sites. But overall, so again, of your overall program savings, right here, total, 300 million program in 2022 cost, year 2022, $40 million for you to do it as part of the partnership. That's all as a result, essentially, of your treatment plant savings. Now, it's a little different when we look at the Yarmouth cost. It costs Yarmouth more money to convey all their wastewater over to Dennis. Makes sense? Biggest flow, farthest distance, it's going to take them more cost. So they're not saving on collection, it's actually costing them money to be part of that partnership to convey that wastewater. However, they do save almost $20 million at the treatment plant. Economy of scale, instead of doing it on their own, they're sharing with 2 other communities. Not saving as much as the other 2 communities, but clearly saving. Their big savings is in the O&M cost, because again, they're sharing with 2 other communities for that operation and maintenance cost. The effluent recharge, they actually had 2 very large recharge sites, so they actually pay a little bit more for the effluent recharge capital as well. But the bottom line is they are saving money mainly because of the O&M cost versus the other 2 communities are saving it mainly on capital cost. So if you look at, this is the overall program cost, so this has your collection system in it, as well as the shared partnership cost. You can see Harwich, 300 million versus 260 that we showed on that previous slide. You can see Yarmouth capital is about the same, and 25 million or so savings for Dennis. You can see the savings in the operating costs. Again, Yarmouth is saving more on the operating costs, so that's their big advantage right there. And then it adds up to what we showed previously. Now, that's where we are today. A lot of simplification in terms of where we are for combining the systems. Some of that would need to be refined, but clearly we feel we're on the sort of conservative side at this point, which is where we want to be. We would continue to look, though, for cost savings programs. And those cost savings include working with several of the Mass Department of Transportation projects that are scheduled along Route 28 from Harwich all the way over to the Barnstable line. Excuse me. We would also look at ways to save money, whether it made sense for you to pump all the way over to that pumping station at 134 and 28, or to connect into the sewer system in Dennis and share part of that piping cost along 28, or actually go up Lower County Road or some other route to try to refine that. So all those details still need to be worked out, but we feel pumping all the way over provides a conservative cost for now. Similar for Yarmouth coming the other way. And again, we're looking to make sure all these components would qualify for 0% interest loans. I realize this is a little bit washed out. I think you've seen copies of this plan. This shows the Mass Department of Transportation projects along Route 28. We had a meeting with their project manager and created this figure versus it being in several people's heads and never being put on a figure before. So this has been an eye-opener, but the important thing is they said that if you can sequence, so the one that we spoke about right here, they have a project scheduled to go out for construction in 2023, be out for a couple years, and then put a 5-year block on construction on that roadway. So we want to be ahead of that curve. But if you give them the pipe that needs to be designed, they're going to do all the other road work. So you're only paying for the pipe. That's a significant savings right there, particularly when you're in a state-controlled highway road.
And then the
So those are the
5-year
things we're trying to do.
Is the 5-year, the restriction on digging it up again, right?
That's after they complete
After they're
construction.
done,
Yes.
yeah. Michael?
Did New Orleans just do something similar?
I believe they've been trying to do that for one of the sections in the downtown, yes.
Yeah.
So we're trying to line that up for sequencing for the connections in on all of these projects. As you can see, Dennisport is already under construction. So, you know, that one's already, the horse has left the barn, so to speak. But we've looked at some routes. That's why I mentioned maybe going up Lower County Road, or there are actually some roads that we've looked at and parking lots that we could get around the Route 28 area through Dennisport for the majority of it, to get you connected over if that was the preferred route. Similar projects being done over here in Yarmouth to connect into Dennis. The Bass River Bridge is about ready to start construction. I think there's a MassDOT project that starts every year for like the next 5 or 6 years in this stretch. So it's a challenge to try to coordinate them, but that's why we're trying to work that into the phasing schedule. And that's why you see some revisions to what was previously presented. Where are we with the agreement? I think we're actually very close. There has been a lot of good suggestions made for revising the agreement, tweaks more or less. The really two issues that remain are the final agreed upon membership, makeup of the commission membership. Right now, the proposal is that it would be 2 representatives from Dennis, 2 from Harwich, and 3 from Yarmouth. Still some discussion going on with Yarmouth over that, but I think we'll get there. And then there was a suggestion made recently, which I think we've heard similar concerns expressed in all 3 communities, so I think this actually goes a long way towards trying to address that issue. And that was a proposed, as part of the budget process, just to review what was in there, the commission would develop a budget by November 1st of the upcoming fiscal year. They would present the budget to the 3 communities once the commissioners adopted it with a majority vote. They'd present it out to the 3 communities, get input from boards, committees, public at large. And then that input was going to come back to the commissioners, who would then make any modifications to it based on that input, and then have to pass a final budget by a 2/3 vote by January 15th, so that they could get all the numbers and budget information out to the communities to meet their budget schedules. The suggestion that's been made is that there be a requirement to hold a 3-town Board of Selectmen's meeting in the middle of, prior to the budget being finalized. And what that committee would be, or what that meeting would be a public meeting held. The representatives from all 3 town boards of selectmen would hold a joint meeting, and they would vote on the budget after the commissioners presented that latest version to them. And they would, by those members present, would need to pass it by a majority vote. There's a little discussion going back and forth whether that can be a requirement or advisory. There are some members pushing that it be a requirement, even if it requires modifying the special legislation that was filed. On that note, the special legislation did not pass last fall, was hung up in committee. So it's been refiled by the state representatives because all the bills have to be refiled in this coming 2-year cycle. So that was refiled in January. We're looking for input from the state reps and senators as to what they believe the time frame and schedule is for trying to get that legislation passed through the legislature at this point. Because clearly, going to any type of May town meeting, you would want to have that legislation passed before you brought the articles to town meeting for endorsement of the agreement. So getting close on the agreement, special legislation's been filed. I think the cost numbers are very positive. And there's some discussion, there's a couple bullets that got left over in there, I apologize. But there's some discussion of trying to hold another 3-town meeting to get everybody brought up to date again in the March, perhaps April timeframe. So that's where we are with DHY.
Thank you. Michael?
I mean, David, can you just clarify for me? For the past 2 years, we've been talking about our CWMP, and I've been saying the $240 million 40-year project. Isn't that the number we've been talking about?
That's what's in your comprehensive wastewater management plan, yes.
And so 300 million comes from where?
Let me walk through that.
Thank you. Brief, because I'm just going to ask you for all the numbers.
Sure. Your town has that. This is a backup. This is, as I said, these are 2-year 2022 cost numbers. The cost in your comprehensive wastewater management plan were 2016. So we've gone through as part of updating the costs for all 3 towns, making sure the same cost per unit foot, different factors, contingency numbers are all uniform in all 3 towns now. So they were brought up to a base of 2018 and then projected to 2022 using 3% a year inflation. So there's a memo that's with your town administrator and your finance director, Carol Capola, and I believe they've passed that information on to your financial advisors so that we can get back to you and answer the question that I know you're going to ask next of what's it mean by rephasing versus what we had. So they're trying to get those so that we can get back and answer you that question. But that's how your 240 went to the 300 through updates and inflation to 2022.
I mean, I think that I'd like to add that back to the agenda at some point. That's a very important conversation that we've gone from 2016 and sold the taxpayers on a $240 million project. It's now $300 million or 6 years later. So I'd like to have that conversation and kind of update on everyone where it is. As far as the work material on the cost savings that you're saying that we're going to have, along with what you just alluded to, the other question, what it's going to mean, where do we get the material on these cost savings that you've come up with? From what was in the CWMP to where we are now and the cost savings you're saying we're going to have by going to this program. Can we get that work material?
Yes, we're in the process. You may recall, all this work has been funded through a state grant that the towns received to fund the cost analysis and the development of the agreement. We're in the process of writing all that up, so there'll be a report produced that provides all that cost backup.
Thank you, David.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, at our last DHY meeting, I had brought that up. Because in achieving some of the cost savings, in heading in this direction, it's going to actually change the phasing of how much we borrow and when we borrow it in Harwich. And for anybody, you did say it, but I just want to make sure it didn't go unheard. For anybody out there who's listening to this, even going to this model, still, I guess it was what, about 70%? Our costs are still, aside from the common system, we're going to be bearing about 70% of the cost by burying pipes in the ground and bonding for our own piping and system. So this is a separate thought, and it also precipitates a change in the phasing. So David had said, you know, that we were going to explore just what that was and when that would hit, so that everybody has a full understanding of what the cost is, but more importantly, when the cost is.
Larry, do you have something?
I don't.
Michael, you have anything
All
else?
set. Yep.
Ed? Okay.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I
Appreciate
have
it.
one other slide.
Oh, sorry.
You can't do that.
All right.
Of course he does.
I'll cover it really quick.
Signs all
I won't drone on. I was asked 3 questions based on, I guess, some questions that the wastewater support committee had presented. I just want to touch upon them briefly. The certificate of compliance that was noticed in the DRI, Development of Regional Impact Certificate from the Cape Cod Commission, is really outdated. And I know Selectman Valentine has also had some discussions with folks at the commission. They now use a process called the 208 Consistency Review. The certificate of compliance is nowhere in that. That was geared towards the DRI processes. So we've had discussions with them, as we've been having all along. When I got the specific question, I went back to ask them, is there something we needed to do? And I saw from an email forwarded to me that all they've said at this point is just send us a letter saying what you're doing. We already know what you're doing. Essentially, the person I spoke with said the town of Harwich is their poster child for what they want municipalities to be doing. So there's no negativity about anything that you don't have a certificate of compliance. Regarding Cape Cod Commission approval.
I have a question.
David, if I may, can we get that in writing so that we can stick it in our file?
Well, I'll offer to help draft that letter of what you're doing to send to the town, and then they actually said they would issue you, this is my term, but a dummy certificate of compliance to cover their record.
And that's what I'm after. I'm
Yes.
after whoever picks this up after we're
Yes.
all gone.
Yep.
We'd like them to have that.
Fully agree, yes.
In the meantime, I have an email from the Cape Cod Commission outlining what Dave is talking about as well. I think I sent it,
Yeah, right, I think you did.
I think I sent it to you, Julie, but we can put that, send that around.
Regarding the Cape Cod Commission approval of documents that are being designed and this and that and what have you, you know, we've been having discussions with them. We've been inviting them to meetings. They were actually at the Colebrook, most recently, site walk for the environmental notification form that was filed for that project. So we've been keeping them in the loop all the way. They said we didn't need to file any documents with them, but we will do it anyway, just because, again, there's a document that was out there saying to file. So when we get ready for bid, the final documents, we will make sure that they have a copy for the record. Similarly, there are other regulatory agencies we have to do that with, such as the Mass Historic Commission and some others, because they had said we don't need to review documents along the way because we know you're doing work in disturbed areas already, streets and those types of things. You're not doing big cross-country work. So, but we're going to file a set of documents with that agency as well, just so everybody understands what's being done. There was a question regarding the technical review committee requirements that were listed in your approval certificate from the commission as well. What the intent of that committee was, and it was mirrored after the one they had approved for Chatham, which was the previous comprehensive wastewater management plan they had approved, was to just have whatever form of a wastewater committee you were using at the time. Right now, it's your wastewater support committee, that they would just meet on a regular basis, just to review upcoming phasing plans, what was to be done after the phase you're implementing now is to be done, making sure it's being discussed in your capital plans. Any new technology that someone may propose to them, that they would consider that, and just look back at what the comprehensive wastewater management plan says you should be doing moving forward. And that's truly what's meant by the living document and an adaptive management plan, which is the last item, is that you would always be looking at this plan, not putting it on the shelf and saying it's a cookbook for someone to look at later, that it's a living document that you're constantly looking at to make sure it's current, meeting the town's needs, for instance, revising the phasing plan now to meet the DHY partnership if you choose to go down that road, those types of things. So those two are really dovetailed together. As part of the technical review committee, it was suggested that you invite someone from the Cape Cod Commission and DEP to those meetings on a regular basis. So that's where we are with those documents.
Michael?
David, if we could, can we get what you just said in writing to our wastewater support committee and to the board?
I'd be happy to put that in an email, send it out, sure.
Thank you.
I've sent it to the wastewater support committee. the items that you just mentioned. They have that.
It's my turn.
I'd like it.
I said to say.
Okay, we're good.
Okay,
Do you want,
Thank you.
excuse me, do you want David to comment on the next item on the new business? If there is a question, allowing the town administrator to execute sewer collection system grant applications, Phase 2. I assume it came from you, I'm not sure.
So that is one of the documents I mentioned earlier that DEP is looking for from the town. Basically what it does is, by a vote of the board, appoints the town administrator in this case as authorized to sign any documents associated with the SRF loan.
Oh, that's right.
That's a
Madam
document.
Chair, I'd ask that we table this until the town administrator's back. I actually have a problem with giving him carte blanche to sign loans. I think that should be a board's decision. Grant applications, I certainly have no problem with, but
Sure.
we meet every week. There's really no reason why this board
We
can't
can
take
hold
it
up.
up.
That's no problem. So we don't need anything more,
that
but
okay?
thank you very
Super.
much for
Thank
the
you very much.
presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Larry.
And we'll follow up with Chris on any other questions. And David, you'll help us get that documentation.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and hold,
Okay.
sorry, new business. Authorization of the town administrator to execute all sewer collection system Phase 2 SRF grant and/or loan activities until next week. Request to approve and sign the Green Communities Designation Grant Project application. Michael?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the Town of Harwich application for Green Communities Designation Grant for $152,910 and to sign the required certificate of application as presented by Sean Liberty, Facilities Manager.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Just to comment for the public, the application is for a boiler at the library, and Sean's done an extensive amount of work. It's in the packet.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excuse me.
Thanks for sticking around.
Good presentation.
Thank you. Fire chief amended request, capital plan for fire department vehicle replacement. The chief is here. Good evening, chief.
I've had some ideas over my years on how to maybe make us a little leaner and a little meaner. And without saying too much, the last two and a half hours explain why. Reality. So looking at our capital requests, we were coming in this year on the capital plan for a replacement of a 1992 pumper.
2001.
2001 pumper. That was $600,000. That truck is on the schedule for a reason. It's tired, and we can go into a lot of debate as to why, but it's tired. We pushed out, because of the cost of Station 2, we pushed out, all of us collectively pushed out the replacement of the 1992 ladder. That's a 110-foot emergency one ladder truck that we purchased in 1992 at $1.4 million. That, to say the least, is a lot of money. We can't go without the ladder truck. We have to have a ladder truck to do the job that all of you expect us to do, and it's a necessity. So, with the idea that's kind of been floating around my head, I spoke with staff, and mainly the gentleman to my left, and said, listen, we have a problem. I think we can make the glass half full, but we need a plan, and we need to do it right away, because we've already submitted our capital plan, and I apologize for coming in at a late date, but with the idea of saving the taxpayers $1 million, I think you might excuse us for being a little late. So I would ask the deputy chief to just go over the plan and give you an explanation briefly as to what we're doing.
Great, thank you.
So what I have in front of me is in the packet. I have copies of it if somebody in the audience wants it. Essentially, the difference in the vehicles we talk about, engines carry hose and water. The ladder obviously carries ladder, tools to ventilate the roof, forcible entry, and they have two distinct separate purposes. What we're looking at doing is, well, first of all, our plan for replacing the ladder was to change from a straight ladder truck like we have now to a tower, which has a bucket on the end. We feel, the chief and I had talked about this extensively, we feel it's a little bit safer for operations, a little bit more versatile. When we have large fires, it's a much safer platform for flowing large volumes of water from an elevated stream versus what we do now. So with that in mind, as we started looking for this, there's a third animal out there called a quint. And what a quint is it does 5 functions. The 5 functions being it has a pump, it has hose, it has ladders, has ground ladders, it does all the functions of both trucks. Now, it could be called like a truck by committee. A lot of times, a lot of things don't work well like that. It really is how you use it. And that's up to us to decide by policy and procedure as to how we would use this vehicle. The big change in what we're proposing from what we have now is the size of the ladder. Currently, I have a 110-foot ladder that has nothing to do with height. It really has to do with reach. Most of the houses are set quite a distance back off the road. And because of the size of the truck, we're limited to leaving it in the street, so we need the reach of the ladder to get to the house. The vehicle that we're looking at is a much shorter wheelbase vehicle. It's almost the size of an engine, just a little bit bigger. The ladder is set lower and hangs off the rear, and the jacks are only in the midship mount, where right now with the E1 there's four jacks, two in the front, 2 in the back. So it takes much more space to set up. The Quint has a much shorter footprint to set up, and we'd be able to essentially, in some cases, get it down a driveway, get it behind a building, get it closer to hopefully overcome the 40 feet of aerial that we're losing to do this. The other thing that factors into this, as we talked about it, is mutual aid. Brewster has a 100-foot ladder, Dennis has a 100-foot ladder, so in the places where we need the height, the Belmont condominium, where we could probably get the Quint to the roof, but we'd have to get in close, we'd still have a ladder truck available to us from around the surrounding towns to make up that distance. It does involve a little bit of shuffling of the capital plan. We change our ambulance replacement. We push it out 1 year. We had a long conversation with Kyle and felt that the vehicles that we have now are durable enough and in good enough place that we can absorb that in the plan without doing too much damage to the fleet. So there's a lot of moving parts, but I think that we're comfortable that it accomplishes our needs, and we can fix what it changes through policy and procedure, and it's an advantage to the town by taking $600,000 out of this year and $1 million out overall.
We've, other than senior staff, we have talked to a cross-section of the department about this change. We have talked to surrounding towns. I've consulted with my peers, fire chiefs, and they agree what we're trying to do makes sense, and that it's a good idea. We've consulted with Kyle, the head mechanic, as to pushing the ambulances out and being able to have, because he's going to have to take care of this vehicle, is consult him, give him some education. He's on board. He thinks it's a good idea. What we are doing, though, clearly, is putting all of our eggs in one basket. We're saying to the taxpayers, we're saying to the board, that we will forego the $600,000 this year. In 4 years, we will forego $1.4 million. But a year from now, we're asking that you trust what we're saying to you, that we can make this work, but we would absolutely need their support on the $1 million for this one truck that would serve as 2. Also understand, we're reducing the fleet by 1. So going forward, you reduce maintenance costs, you reduce the cost of equipping an additional truck. So there are substantial savings to this, but acknowledging that we're also asking for a lot of money.
Thank you. We appreciate you looking at your plan and trying to come up with creative ways. It's not an easy thing to do, and we appreciate putting the time and energy into it. Ed?
So, the engine would be eliminated from this year. Where do you have purchases of ambulances currently?
We would be up.
So it's supposed to be in 21 right now. So it's 21, then 24, 23. And we're pushing it from 21 to 22, and then we'll go back to the every other year from that point.
Okay. And the Quint would come in 21?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Remove 600 from 20, remove 1.4 million from 24.
Okay. That makes sense?
Michael, do you have a?
No, I would make a motion if you want.
All right.
I move that we approve the fire chief's request to amend the capital plan as presented. Support.
And Dana,
Support.
did you have a comment?
Well, we can have discussion. I second it, but we can have discussion now.
Moved and seconded, so Dana?
Yeah, the Finance Committee, independent of them, discussed this idea of a quint rather than the ladder truck, not reducing the fleet, but we discussed this in a workshop that we had earlier in the year, and this plays right in well with what we had discussed.
Right, thank you. So it's moved and seconded. Don, we have a motion on the floor. Go ahead, Ed.
So, by your amendment, you're supporting the request?
I'm moving that we support the
Right,
request to modify the capital plan. Because I think capital outlay, I'm not sure if you've been before them yet.
No, we've submitted a revised capital plan through the administrator.
I'm only saying that we'll
You
support.
want to move forward with this change into their capital plan, right?
And just so you know, so everyone knows that I have briefed the administrator on the plan.
Okay, right, thank you.
My only consideration is that, given that we have to submit our article on the capital plan this Friday, as it stands now, it will go in as the old plan, and that's how it will be presented at town meeting, and at town meeting, we'll have to go through the process of amending it.
That's fine.
Whereas if we move to amend it now, it's an article in the warrant. All of the articles are essentially at our discretion. And at town meeting, we could present the plan that's presented.
Michael?
I hear what he's saying, but there's no agenda item tonight to modify a capital plan. I think capital outlay should modify the plan. I think that what we're saying, or what I'm asking that we say, is that we support his request. Where it happens, I think that needs to happen in a venue that's advertised to the public so that it can be changed legally.
Right, so we're supporting the request to amend their capital plan, and we can have that conversation on town meeting floor. Okay, Don?
And to Michael's point, I personally want to thank the fire department for thinking outside the box. I mean, they're really clearly trying to make an effort. They've heard that we're stretched, especially in the borrowings, and they're not compromising what they're doing, but they're trying to think of a better way to approach it, so it helps them and it helps the town. And personally, I really appreciate that.
Noreen?
I would just say that, this work that's being done is so wonderful and appreciated, but I couldn't imagine any amendments to the capital plan tonight when we've just heard, that the wastewater project would have to be amended by 60 or 80 million before it's passed, so.
No, this is supporting their request to change their capital plan.
No, just as an aside, I think that's great, but I heard somebody talk about amending the capital plan tonight, looking for the vote at the end of the week, the town's capital plan. And the town's capital plan is now not showing 60 million or more in wastewater costs, unless I heard the previous discussion incorrectly.
That's right.
We have 240 million showing on the capital plan, and now it's.
One that
If I may,
shows.
just to clarify, my position on that, Noreen, was we've been talking about the CWMP being 240 million over 40 years. So it wouldn't show up on the capital plan in that way.
Yeah.
It's just, tonight in that presentation, it showed 60 million higher than I was aware of.
Right, and I shouldn't have said the whole amount. What did catch my eye in that presentation was the amount of what had been the proposed treatment plant at the transfer station was significantly lower. I don't have my numbers with me, but that number would be way out of whack with our current plan.
Ed?
But I guess the difference is what we have now is we have our current wastewater plan. Until we get the state to pass legislation the 3 towns to sign on and get an agreement, all 3 town meetings, that other capital costs really is just a pure, study at this point. It has no,
It's not for year one.
Yeah.
Right,
No,
that's
no.
not on the books at this point, so. Okay, so we're gonna, did we finish the
didn't
vote?
vote.
Okay.
No.
We need to vote.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And thank you both very
Thank you
much.
very
Thank
much.
you. Okay. We are going on to the wastewater support committee request to approve resident mailing.
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members, Assistant Town Administrator, Noreen Donahue, Wastewater Support Committee. Unfortunately, in the packet, you received samples of a possible mailer, but they were an older version, so I have just handed out the current one. The committee would like to gather contact information on the residents in the Phase 2 area for better communication as the sewer project moves on. We understand that people have different communication preferences and different levels of technology comfort, so multiple techniques must be used to reach people in this day and age. The idea of this postcard mailer evolved from an irrigation questionnaire that was sent out by the Water Department a couple of years ago. The Water Department had good results with this technique, and we thought it might serve our purposes. The mailer would give the residents the opportunity to provide their email address if they choose, and to opt onto the town's voice broadcast system for updates about construction and neighborhood occurrences. With your approval, our intention would be to send these cards to the homeowners in the Phase 2 area for future communication needs. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Noreen. This is great work, so we appreciate you putting it together. Larry?
As Noreen says, a lot of discussion, and we're always worried about communication. They're trying to figure out how to communicate, as trying as it sounds, so, good job.
Michael?
I move that we approve the resident mailing as presented by the wastewater support committee for Phase 2 wastewater system, so long as the money is available.
Second.
to send.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. No, that's all right.
All right.
This is a postscript to this, though. The town administrator's not here, but I'm sitting here getting older by the week, waiting for something to happen with a project manager for this.
Well, and that was gonna be my question for Chris, where we are in our RFP. I don't,
I'm past the point of asking where we are. I'm at the point of saying we need to be.
yeah, we'll follow up.
We'll add it on to the agenda again for an update on where we stand with that.
On that note, if I could, I would put in a plug for a future agenda item for a wastewater center. It's another thing we've talked about for a long time, but a physical home to build up the library, and if the board could possibly agenda that at some time, it would be very much appreciated.
Thank you, Noreen. We will. We'll add that to the agenda. Okay. Request from Community Development Partnership for letter of support for block grant. Authorize the chair to sign. Michael?
I move that we approve the request from Community Development Partnership for the letter of support for the block grant and authorize the chair to sign.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Preliminary draft warrant. To what extent, do we want to hold off
You
on
want me to
this?
start at Article 1? No, I really don't.
What day is it?
Yeah, what day is it?
Michael?
I don't think there was anything other, I think there was a review, and if
Yeah.
there was some you wanted to take out,
I have,
but I'm not sure.
Or do you want to bring it back?
well,
Yeah.
'Cause it's,
I've got a lot of questions on a lot of things in this, and I think it was, I don't want to use the words thrown together, but there's some things in here that we haven't discussed. There's petition articles that we are not sure have vetted through legal yet. I think to Ed's points tonight, though, if we don't take some of this up tonight, it's final as of Friday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm thinking that
I
we
mean-
we may need another meeting, because the line item on this, on the agenda, preliminary draft warrant, I don't believe that has discussion on our actual articles in there, and I would ask, I think through the assistant town administrator now, why are we seeing this on a Monday night, and it has to be approved by Friday night?
Yeah, it's true.
This is a bit silly.
Ed?
You know, by practice, and I believe by bylaw or our charter, what we can do is we can eliminate articles from the warrant, but that's about it. If we want a change to an article, we'd be left with having to make that change by amendment on town meeting floor, which, you know, in my history, if you can minimize the number of amendments that are made on town meeting floor, it's less confusing for town meeting folks, and they can be prepared for what they're actually going to vote on, rather than having something thrown at them at the last minute. So
Let me ask you a question. I take what you said, and this is gonna get me in trouble. We haven't always met this date in the past. You know, we've passed it, I don't think we made it last year, I'm not sure of the years before. You know, what happens? Do we get hung and quartered if this is delayed a week, if we don't meet this date and actually have a discussion on the town warrant? Because I'm uncomfortable the way it is now,
Well-
moving ahead. So I just want to know what the bottom line is.
Go ahead, Ed.
well, you know, our charter is fairly clear. There's a cutoff date for having an article
I understand
presented.
that.
in
We haven't
final.
always met it, is my point.
Well, and in years when we haven't met it, we push off articles to a special town meeting, which we hold during the town meeting, but it has a later date of needing to submit articles for.
So, Michael?
Ed said a couple things. He said, he used the word past practice a little while ago.
Yeah.
And now he's saying by charter, they have to be presented. And I remember having this conversation with you last year because we didn't meet the deadline. The articles have to be presented to the Board of Selectmen by Friday, correct?
In final form.
It says final form.
In final
So
form.
I would ask that the chair work through the town administrator, and if we have to modify this by Friday, that we have a special meeting, and it's not too late to advertise for one for Friday that just goes over the warrant. Because I don't see how with this line item, we can go through and start picking away at things and taking them out tonight. I really don't.
Don?
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's what I was going to say. It's a kind of a pick your poison position right now. There is nothing in this posting that suggests that we're going to be voting on and taking out articles. It sounded like it was just a review of preliminary draft warrants. So I would strongly support what Michael's saying and agenda this, and just the sole item for the agenda would be.
All right, but then what's the availability? We need to determine availability of the board members, so.
And from a practical point of view, if you know, if we're going to do a special meeting, it would be good to do it like Friday night, so then whatever changes or modifications can be incorporated, so they're ready by close of business on Friday.
I do have a commitment
You mean
Friday
Thursday
night.
night?
Thursday night.
He means Thursday
Thursday
night. He said Friday night, right.
Yeah,
I can be there Thursday.
I can
So-
make it Thursday.
Can you make it Thursday?
I don't know. I don't think so. Friday I'm available, but I could send my notes to Chris. You know, just to extend on what Don said too, Chris really should be here to explain why he put some of this in there the way he did, so. Otherwise, you know, town meeting will be doing a lot of modifying.
Right.
But if you have a quorum on Thursday, I have no problem sending my notes to Chris.
All right, well, let me talk to Chris tomorrow morning, and we'll follow up from there.
And Chris needs to know that the delineation here is whether it even shows up on the warrant, as opposed to us voting to indefinitely postpone as a position. Those are
Well,
two
that's a
different,
different action.
two different thoughts.
Right.
We can still do the
Well,
other.
Bob will see him first thing in the morning, and I'll follow up with him tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? Or-
I'll call.
okay.
I'm not
Right,
in
oh, you're
tomorrow.
not in tomorrow, okay, all right.
We'll
Okay.
touch base.
Michael?
Just to add to that, in your conversation with Chris, this system is clearly broken, and that needs to be fixed more than anything. We're being asked to go through an entire warrant and approve it tonight,
Right. No.
without going over any of these articles.
No, agreed. Okay. So we'll follow up with the possibility of the special meeting on Thursday. Thursday evening. It has to be evening. Okay. Encourage all to participate. Gender-neutral terminology. Request for Harwich to change the name from Board of Selectmen to Select Board.
Hi, I'm Amy Harris. I live at 4 Chapel Hill Lane. Yeah, I would like to encourage more people to participate in government, which is why I put that forward. I thought that having a more gender-neutral name would be helpful in that because it's encompassing, inclusive, and welcoming. We're a government for the people, by the people, not for the men and women, by the men and women. And it's government, so it would be best practice. And it's not an organization. I wouldn't ask the LA Rams to change the name to the LA Sheep. And there's 80 other towns in the Commonwealth that have used a select board in a good way to govern. There's 4 more. I gave you the list of 76. There's 4 more that have been added on. Also, Falmouth was looking at it last week, and they were trying to figure out a way to do it without changing their charter, but I think they're going to go back to charter change.
Thank you. So, and thank you for bringing it to the board. I think we did have this request maybe a year or 2 ago. I can't remember exactly. Any comments? Dana, did you want to?
This was actually discussed back in the 90s, too, that I remember, and probably before that. I would just say, if you're going to even consider this, that you form a committee and do it all the way through, because there are charter implications. I personally like the name Policy Board better than Select Board, but that's my own personal preference. But there's a lot of implications here, and you want to know how the state recognizes it. You want to know, I mean, the state has specific language as well that gives you power and authority under the name Selectmen. I happened to come on to the board with 2, Shirley Gomes and Sandra Daniels, who's now Sandra Hall, and they taught me a lot about this, and they approve of the word Selectmen, and they approve of being chairman of the committee and all those things. So it has a long history, but if you're going to do it, form a committee and do it correctly. Give them a charge and tell them to go through the whole thing. And that's what we discussed back then. We didn't do it then, but that's the way it needs to be done if you're going to do it.
Thank you, Dana. Don?
And Dana and I don't always agree with each other, but I will say that relative to our last discussion, we got 3 days to put on the annual. If we were going to be bringing it to this town meeting, it would be wise to start with a committee that gives us a recommendation so that we can put it on properly instead of just slapping it on.
I don't think we were going to.
Yeah, well, but my point is, it has to start somewhere, and I think Dana's probably right. It needs to be. Well, since I'm only going to be saying it this year once, Dana's probably right. But there are implications, so it's something that we're not really set up to do. There's a lot of charter language changes that are going to have to be made, and there probably are some changes that we need to request from state legislators, because it's not a term of art. It's actually a title for a position.
But why would we not just put that back to the charter committee? Why would we create another committee for this?
Whoever that might be is fine. I'm just saying that we wouldn't want to take an action on it tonight because we
No, I agree
probably
with
want
that.
somebody looking at it.
I'm just saying, the implication, people are talking, I'm
Well-
saying, we already have a committee.
And there's also financial implications for that, too, so we would want to have that information in order to make any decision as well.
Donna Richardson, John Joseph Road. I'd just like to read a comment related to this topic. Language is the most important, powerful tool we have as humans. It binds us, instructs us, and when used well, it creates a common understanding. and it is essential for creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and included. Historically, language has left many out. Individuals and groups have been marginalized and discriminated against because of their culture, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, and socioeconomic status, appearance, and more. We can do better. Inclusive language seeks to treat all people with respect, dignity, and impartiality. It is constructed to bring everyone into the group and exclude no one. It does ask something of us. It asks us to try, to change deeply embedded habits, to consider the implications of words and phrases, and to dig deeply into empathy and imagine an experience not our own.
Thank you. Okay, so.
Well, I throw my 2 bits in.
Yeah.
You know, I also think looking into this change is something worthwhile to do, but something we should not just do off the cuff if we're going to change. Well, it's not only the charter, but there's also many sections in our bylaws that need to be changed. I mean, and you know, I know the other organizations that we're a member of the Massachusetts Municipal Association. They, as towns have taken up this change, they voted that to accept members of select boards as well as members of boards of selectmen to be officers and members of their committees and whatnot. But, you know, there is some implications in state law. I've never read a general law that says anything other than a board of selectmen. A ruling from, I don't know, the Attorney General may be requested on that. But as to the one disagreement I have with Mr. DaCosta is the policy board. You know, this board is not a policy board. This is the executive board of the town. The policy board is town meeting that votes on policy changes. So, anyway.
Thank you, Ed.
Hi, Judith Winters, 11 Fairways Drive. I just wonder how, I don't know any men who would prefer to be called women, and I don't know any women who would like to be called men. It's just pretty simple. I just wanted to tell you a story. I have a grandson who has learned to read, and he asked me one day when we were driving through town, several towns, and it was time for elections. Grandma, how come you have to be a man to work on this town? And I said, you don't. You just have to be someone who's interested, but it's 2019, and you're right, Donovan, things should be changed. So I would encourage you to support this change. I don't see really any good reason not to. I agree with you that a policy board is not consistent with what the other towns in the Commonwealth have done. So for consistency's sake, I think select board makes more sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would it be helpful for me to get the other 80 towns to let you know what they did to put this through and then check it with the Attorney General?
No, thank you for that, but what we can do, because it's a good recommendation, but as we've discussed, it does require, you know, further review. We should put it back to the Charter Committee.
Yeah, I'm going to move that we make that referral.
Right.
Okay.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
And just for conversation point, I did reach out to the town of Brewster, who had this on a town meeting a couple of years ago, and they sent me a tremendous amount of information on it. So they sent me links to the whys and the why nots. The only part that I don't like is the government won't recognize us as anything other than Board of Selectmen, but we would be referred to as the Select Board if we made this change. But all of our documents would still have to say Board of Selectmen. But there is a tremendous amount of information on the internet about this change, links and endless reading, more than the 204-page packet tonight.
So moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for your patience. Waited a long time.
In terms of Cornelius Pond Purchase and Sale Agreement, P&S and Conservation Restriction, CR, sign the purchase and sale. This is being held, and I'll ask Chris to bring it back next week. We'll do executive session, and then we will put this back, and we'll put it on the top of the agenda for Michael Lack. Participation in the FY 2019 Truro Regional CDBG grant, approve and authorize the chair to sign. We were holding this item as well. Michael?
Yeah, we're going to hold that because an acronym was used again. We can't use that on an agenda. It has to be spelled out per the Attorney General's office.
So on to J, request from Jack Sharon of Freedom Cruise Line to increase the number of passengers per trip on the Freedom Ferry from 80 to 99. Hi.
Hi, thanks for sticking around for me.
Thanks for sticking around for us.
Anytime, Ed, anytime.
There you go.
I came before this board a little less than a year ago when we took over the ferry service. I want to give you a quick review of our year, which was a record-breaking year for number of passengers going in and out of Harwich. Brant Point Light is a big, probably the most photographed spot when we're going in and out of Nantucket. We passed that 486 times. The Freedom traveled 11,178 nautical miles. So for non-boaters, that's over 12,000 miles. So you could drive to Los Angeles to see the Rams and back twice in what we did in that short season. We were underway for about 650 hours, and the Steamship Authority measures number of passengers by one-way passages. We did just under 24,000. A couple things that we're changing coming up. I don't know if you've driven on Route 28, but we have our new ticket office, which I'm real excited about, along with the other things going on in the harbor. We kind of, instead of just throwing a shed on the property, we took some time and some money to match the architectural details to the other buildings that are in there. We're upgrading our ticket system to be more efficient than it was previously. But the problem that we had last year is we were sold out many times. Overall, it was 39% of the total trips we turned people away. If you take out the dead leg trips, which is when we go over, drop people off, and then we come back usually empty, on the 11:30 and the 8 o'clock trips in the summer, we're sold out more than 60% of the time. So I really don't even know how many people we turned away. I do know from my website, I had over 6,300 visits to the purchase tickets page that weren't completed. So most of the average ticket purchase is 3. So if I'm turning away as many people as we're taking. So we had a limit on our license from the Steamship Authority at 80 passengers per trip. That was put in place back in the mid-90s. I approached the Steamship Authority late summer, early fall, went through, met with their management, met with their port council, met with the Board of Governors. They've approved me to change that up to 99 per trip from 80. And I'm in the process of working with the Coast Guard. We have a plan set out. I have to upgrade some of the life-saving equipment on the boat. But what I'm asking you is for permission, as written in the harbor management plan. It's up to 80 passengers on the ferry. I'm asking you for your permission to go to 99. The concern that is probably everybody has is parking. So my plan for the parking, in working a lot with John, not only are we picking up almost 90 slips, is that correct? 85, 90 slips, parking spots in the new lot, but I'm also keeping my property across the street where the old ticket booth was just for calling it overnight parking and also overflow parking. We really don't know if that lot's gonna fill up, or are we gonna have excess space. I could fit dozens of cars over there. So I think that's a pretty good plan. So any questions or?
Any questions from the board?
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, no, I talked to Jack about this a bit in his parking lot across the street, especially if he's using it for overnight people. You basically, from their ticket purchase, knows when they're going, when they're coming back, and it's the size of it is such that you have lots of areas where you can basically double stack cars, sort of on a
If I need
valet
to, yeah.
system, if you need to. So it has a huge capacity, really, more than just a single stall
Right.
possibility. So I think I don't really personally would foresee that as a problem. And with that, I'd like to move that we approve his request.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, because in the supporting paperwork and everything here, is there no place for the Coast Guard, or talking about capacity in your?
Yeah, there is. There's a certificate of inspection with the Coast Guard, and currently it is 90. However, there's also a letter of stability with the Coast Guard, and that is up to 128. So basically, the previous owner nor myself, we didn't carry up to 128 nor look for it because our maximum capacity was 80. So we had a buffer of 10 just in case there was an emergency and somebody had to get off the island. So I'm purchasing additional life-saving equipment, being rafts and life preservers, installing them on the boat, and the Coast Guard has written to me that they will upgrade my certificate of occupancy of inspection. I haven't purchased these nor done that. It's a major expense. I don't want to get your blessing before I wrote the check.
And one other question, is to John. We're dredged right now, so that the draft of the boat's not going to really substantially change
No.
to be able to get in and out?
No. An additional 20
That's kind of
people.
his shot to call.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Sorry, I thought you were asking me if the boat was going to draw more water. Please, John.
I don't think that's an issue. I mean, like he said, the certificate of inspection from the Coast Guard, based upon his hull and his vessel type, he's qualified to carry up to 125 passengers. He'll be at 99. You know, the stability tables all account for that, and it'll have very minimal increase in depth. And yes, he's got plenty of depth where he's at. You know, that's the deepest part of our harbor, is that whole east side. We dredged 8+1 when we dredged, so he's got plenty of water under his boat, where he's at.
Thank you, John. Okay, so moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Just one comment.
Oh,
Just
sorry.
shed looks great, sign looks excellent, and
Thanks.
thank you. You addressed my parking concerns. I do think that parking lot's going to fill up. I think I said it before. The harbor's beautiful now, and I appreciate you keeping that lot open for overnight parking, because I think it's going to make a difference.
Great.
Thank
Thanks.
you for what you do for the town.
So
Thank you very much.
John.
moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack.
Town administrators report. Do you want to do this, Bob? or
Just,
do you wanna-
I know that and John is here, Secretariat RFP is final and is out, so that's out on the street.
That.
Yes.
Go ahead, Don.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't understand how I got to this point, but one of the discussions we had was to give evaluation bonus points for the menu. It wasn't to create flat-out minimums. It still got the same basic flaw in it. If you don't carry everything that you have listed, you cannot consider them for an award.
John?
They would be
Madam Chair.
non-responsive.
Boy, I don't know, maybe I misunderstood you, but we have a very basic menu that if you can't meet the basic minimum, you probably shouldn't be signing up to run the snack shack. And then we have 2 other levels where you get points that has a little bit bigger of a menu. I think that's what I heard we wanted based upon Mr. Kukunis's recommendation. So not only are we evaluating price, the lessee's experience, management, but now we are measuring menu. And that's what I think I heard.
I would agree. That's how I heard it too, so.
There's a couple things on there that aren't on there that I'd like to eat, but.
We'll call that the Michael bonus.
Other than that, there you go. Thank you, John.
Probably unhealthy.
All right.
Okay. And on the other items, you saw the material, the Office of Disability did not provide the $250,000. And I'm not sure on the Mass Work sidewalk, I guess it was a denial. I don't know what the follow-up was supposed to be.
Yeah, we'll bring that back.
There's been our state reps had attempted to get the MassWorks people to have an open phone call.
Right.
They chose just to have one of their members called Chris, and they had a
Didn't share the
conversation.
feedback, right, so.
And that's an important point,
Yeah.
because it was turned down
Yep.
in math, and actually John's helping out, is trying to resubmit some of these, because they wanted
Right, so we'll just
again,
have
the
Chris.
format.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
We'll-
but to Ed's point, we're hoping for as much state, be specifically Sarah and Julian's, support as we can get, because that's vital to this grant making.
I'll ask Chris to give us a formal update next week.
So, I know.
Thank you, Bob. Any
Sorry.
selectmen's report?
Not much.
Don? Ed?
Well, sort of to this effort of bringing state interest in what we're doing at both the harbor and the need for this sidewalk, with our Art Week activities and the sheds, we're going to try and make that as much of the opening of the art sheds as much of an event, and bring down some of the folks from the state to sort of build up some momentum. So on future grants, we can
Right.
push that through.
Good idea. Larry?
Nothing.
Michael?
Nothing.
Okay, so can I get a,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
we are adjourned.